Good afternoon, members, and good afternoon to those watching online and in the chamber. Members, we are going to just take a quick check of who is joining us online, and then I'm going to come to the monitoring officer to provide advice.
Thank you, Provost. I believe we have the same members joining us online as we did this morning. However, in addition, I think we have Councillor Chan also online. So, Councillor Chan, can you confirm you're there?
Present.
And we should also have Councillor Duff.
Present.
And Bailey Brock.
Present.
And Councillor Robertson.
Present.
And Councillor James.
Yeah, good afternoon, Scott.
And I think Councillor Reid.
Councillor Reid is trying to join by phone. He's having laptop issues. I spoke with him only 2 minutes ago and he's trying to get in using his phone. If somebody could call him in, be useful. Thanks.
Okay, well, we'll work with Councillor Reid to try and get him online.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hendry. I'm going to allow Mrs. Simpson to come in and provide advice as the monitoring officer.
Thank you, Provost, and good afternoon, councillors. Members of the Harbour Board will be aware that I issued specific advice yesterday in terms of declarations of interests and outlined specifically where declarable interests arise. And that is not by virtue of simply being members of the Harbour Board. I noted this morning that 4 members have declared an interest, in which case they would not be able to participate in this debate. So for clarification, do the members who declared a non-financial interest this morning, do they in fact have a declarable interest by virtue of the fact that they have a personal or business conflict with the business or the matter in hand? Because if the answer to that is no, then you do not have a declarable interest, and I would ask you to suggest and ask the Provost whether that can be withdrawn.
Councillor McCall.
Thank you for that clarification. Given the explanation you've given, I don't have a declarable interest, and therefore I would ask that my declaration of interest be withdrawn.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McCall. Bailey Ahern.
Equally the same, Provost.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith.
Exactly the same for me, thank you.
Yes, and Councillor Massey.
And exactly the same for me.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, members, we will now return to the Chief Social Work Officer annual report, and I will hand back over to Deputy Provost to take the remainder of this item.
Thank you, thank you very much, Deputy Provost. We now move to paper 8, the Chief Social Work Officer annual report for 2021-2022, and I would invite Jackie Pepper to introduce this report.
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. I'm very pleased to bring this annual report for the period 21 to 22 to Council, as it presents in one place an overview of all our social work and social care activity and assists elected members to oversee performance and professional standards. This report is very much a team effort with team managers, team leaders and managers all contributing. And I'd like to thank everyone who's contributed to it, in particular Margaret Steele, who provides business support, Hazel Robertson, who's with us today as Head of Services for Children, Young People and Families, and Kenny Ogilvie as Interim Head of Adult Social Work. And I'm aware that this report contains a huge amount of performance information and data means a lot of numbers. But it's important that we keep in mind that every one of those numbers is a person, and each one a Perth and Kinross resident who needs care and support or intervention in order to keep them safe or others safe and to improve their lives. With that in mind, I'm extremely proud to see what our social work and social care services are achieving, as there is much to celebrate in this report. The report outlines a very challenging year in which the impact of COVID is still being seen, and it's been seen in rising needs and demands, and it clearly shows how our staff have risen to meet those challenges and have done so very effectively. There's a continued focus on improvement, and as you can see from the graph on page 216 of your document pack, the Council has continued to support a continued increase in social work staffing and resources to meet the needs of our most vulnerable. There's also considerable overlap in this report between the previous reports that you've considered today, the Child Protection Committee and the Adult Protection Committee, and that's because, with very few exceptions, it's social workers that lead our public protection work. They're at the centre of that work. Today, Council is asked to note the wide range of work carried out to provide social work services and the continued efforts to manage the additional demands that are presented as a result of COVID-19. And to note that the report has already been submitted to the Scottish Government as part of our reporting requirements. You're asked to approve this report, and I'm happy to take questions. And we're also joined by Kenny Ogilvie and Hazel Robertson. Ross has rejoined the meeting from a child protection perspective, and we have Ian Wilkie online. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And the first question is from Bailey Ahern.
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. My first question is, first of all, thank you very much for the report. It's a very good report, and it does indeed show the huge breadth that social workers in Perth and Kinross have to deal with. My first question is on page 168 in the table there. And it's the child concern reports by age, and you've said in there a particular note is the children and young people in the 11 to 15-year-old age group, and I just wonder why in this particular age group there is such a massive increase. And the part underneath about child concern reports by source, and it says there about the presentations by Police Scotland and the huge increase there. Is that because Police Scotland to change the way they operate to account for the increase, or is this actually a true increase in the number of cases being presented?
I'm going to invite Hazel and Ross to address your question, Bailey Ahern. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Bailey Ahern. In terms of the Police Scotland child concern reports, they are, as we've said this morning, and this also shows they are increasing year on year. They haven't changed their procedures. They have a risk and concern hub for Tayside where all concern reports are quality assured to ensure that they fit with their protocols before they are forwarded and shared with other agencies, particularly Hazel's service. So there's been no change in the staffing. There's been no change in the concern hub. The procedures have been in place for 2 or 3 years. It's probably just as a result of improved awareness and understanding. The vulnerable persons database continues to evolve, so that forces the generation of these reports, which could be linked to non-specific child protection incidents. So it could be as a result of attending another matter that they've identified a concern with a child and young person. In terms of I think I picked this up correctly, I do apologise. In terms of the age category, I think the Child Protection Committee report, we had a look at that as a Child Protection Committee. There has been an increase in the 11 to 15 age group. We think that's potentially contributable in part to COVID. There are a lot of young people in schools and education with mental health difficulties, and we've heard about some of the measures that were put in place through the suicide prevention work. Anything else, Hazel?
I suppose just to add to that, we were also concerned when we saw that rise, and we have done a dip sample with our Police Scotland colleagues just to look at the validation of the concern reports that are being submitted, and are confident that actually these were all legitimate concerns, so they all needed to be considered. So it's there is no particular reasons that we're establishing for that particular rise in that age group, but it's something that is being monitored.
Thank you. Am I allowed my second question, or do you want to come back to me?
Thank Thank you, Bailey Hearn. We'll come back to you for your second question in due course. Councillor Shires, your first question. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I think they're very much related, so I'll try and word them as one if that's okay. At 5.8 in the report, it refers to the recruitment challenges in social work. And then at 6.2, it talks about examples of how staff health and wellbeing is being supported. And I'm guessing the two are very much intertwined. And I wonder if you could elaborate a wee bit on that for us. Thank you.
I think certainly these are very legitimate concerns. I alluded to that earlier today. You know, that we are acutely aware of the pressures on staff and the fact that they've had to work fairly independently for more than 2 years, and not always having the support of their colleagues when they return to an office after a particularly stressful visit, or they're in a Teams call that is particularly traumatic. So I mean, I think these are all being considered in the mix. I've mentioned already, you know, the importance of supervision and support from immediate colleagues. I think we've had newly qualified workers begin who haven't always had the opportunity to learn from their colleagues just by overhearing those conversations or having the reassurance from others that they've dealt with something well. So all of these issues have been addressed, and there's something that we are looking at, you know, how do we better manage that? In the last year, really, people have largely been back in offices, been back within their teams, so that's dissipating quite a bit, but it remains a concern, and our training programmes are looking at, you know, how can we better support our staff. But it is our only asset. It is the thing that we really need to provide, so you know, it is a priority for us.
Now we move to Bailey Williamson.
Thank you very much. My question is, I was wondering, with regard to the Perth and Kinross Alcohol and Drug Partnership, are we seeing a number of people who are seeking support from the Drug and Alcohol Partnership because there have been significant delays in the treatment, and they've possibly become addicted to the drugs that they've been prescribed and struggling to get off them?
Thank you very much, Bailey Williamson. The standards that we're adhering to in relation to drug and alcohol treatment is something that there's very close monitoring of, both locally within the Alcohol and Drug Partnership, but we're also reporting nationally on that, and that's something that we're reporting to the IJB. We can confirm that those reports are available. There's another update coming to the meeting of the IJB on the 15th of February, so happy to circulate that to you, but Kenny might be able to give you some of the detail around that.
Yeah, I mean, just fairly briefly, I mean, obviously there were challenges providing services for people during COVID, but we took a number of actions to try and ensure that those services were available throughout the pandemic. And during the pandemic and since, there has been an increase in referrals specifically for folk relating to alcohol, and that has impacted on the waiting times that we've had in terms of our specialist substance use team responding to people. As Jackie says, there are national targets, or heat targets as they're called, where 90% of people are to be responded to within 3 weeks of the referral coming in. Unfortunately, during the latter period of this report, we weren't meeting that target. We were down, I think, as low as 42%. That said, we've taken a number of remedial actions and we're now up to 86%. So the situation, certainly in terms of responding to people when they get in touch with us looking for support, the waiting times have reduced considerably.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Thank you for another excellent and comprehensive report as well, Jackie. Credit to your team. Just a general question as regards manning levels. It's kind of written between the lines and say section 6 of the appendix. How are you finding generally recruitment? Because I know for a lot of professional staff in all industries it's very difficult at the moment. Are you able to recruit the right people? Because I noticed a lot of their plans going forward are dependent on getting those people. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, because recruitment, particularly in social care and some areas in social work, is particularly challenging at the moment. In Perth and Kinross, we've historically been blessed with a fairly consistent and loyal workforce, but where we are having to recruit into posts, we're finding it's taking longer. And a number of adverts have to go out in quick succession to be able to recruit the right people into the posts. And I think there are pockets of services where that's more acute than others. And I'm looking at Hazel because she might want to say something about that.
Yeah, I think that has been an issue more recently. I think probably pre-COVID, we had no difficulties in attracting and retaining staff. But I think, as in many professions, I think people have often had a look at their lifestyles and decided on alternatives. That's no different within social work. We have had recently a number of vacancies that have taken 2 and 3 different adverts to attract sufficient candidates. I think particularly across our child protection services and our criminal justice services, which have been quite difficult to recruit to. And we've looked at a number of ways of trying to make or enhance those adverts to attract the right candidates. But we're really determined that we really don't want to just reduce our standards in order to have the right people. So it's important that we retain those standards over this time. It's just been a bit more difficult managing the gaps.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kigali.
Yes, I've got a question in reference to the peer mentors on page 175 that were launched in Crieff High School in 2021. Just as to when that will be reviewed as to being, hopefully a success, and if so, when it could get rolled out into other schools across the area.
I'm afraid I don't have the detail on that, but that's something that we can get back to you about.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McPherson now.
Thank you. My question is really a clarification, really. On page 200, it says local authority adoption approvals have decreased each year, and independent agency approvals have increased by 17% since 2016. So I'm just wondering, are adoption approvals overall increasing or decreasing? Thank you.
There's a national position around adoption. We fare fairly positively in terms of the adoption work that we do. It is something that we continue to recruit people who are interested in adoption, and we continue to match the children that we have who are available for adoption too. So that that is something that is not a concern for us in terms of the work that we're doing. I'm sorry, I probably missed the second part of your question. It's gone up or down. No, it's probably fairly stable actually. It's small numbers. It's very small numbers, but it stays fairly stable over time. Where for this year, it looks like an increase, but we have under 10 at any time.
Thank you. And I'll go now to Councillor McCall, and then the first question from Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Deputy Provost, and thank you, Jackie, for that report. My question is in relation to the transition team and the young people that they support into adult and perhaps into adult services. And it's almost like a follow on to the question I asked earlier on today about young people of concern or at risk. So I'm just wondering if there's any, I know obviously you support Fairview School and the young people who are who are in that cohort, but I'm just wondering if there's any plans to widen the scope of the transition team so that young people who perhaps are coming out of school with maybe who are getting supported in school, that they have some continuity of support beyond school when they leave. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor McCall. As you know, we've got a transformation programme underway in the Health and Social Care Partnership to increase the options available for young people with learning disabilities and complex disabilities. I'm not aware of us having a plan to increase the scope or that work, but I'll ask Kenny to give you his observations on that.
Yeah, and as you say, Jackie, the actual transitions team, which is part of our new scope team now, they do focus primarily on people with complex needs. That said, they still work as a point of contact and a triage for all young people going through transitions, and they also act as a sort of centre of excellence and knowledge for young people that don't necessarily meet the criteria of having complex needs, but they support the more generic teams to provide the necessary support for those people. And we are currently taking part in a national, I think as we discussed at a previous meeting, in terms we're taking part in a national pilot to improve support for transitions of all young people moving into adulthood. So I think probably to sum up, in terms of the actual scope team itself, it will still focus on complex needs. It does support the wider system, and in terms of improving support for the wider system as well, like I say, we're taking part in that pilot. We'll evaluate that, and then we'll mainstream that. So that is still a work in progress.
Thank you. And I think Ian Wilkie wants to contribute to this response. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. And just to back up what Kenny has said, and again to reinforce what Bill had said this morning in terms of key priorities for the Child Protection Committee and the Adult Protection Committee, we see this as a key priority to get right. Ross and I are part of national work around identifying transitions pathway and transitions guidelines for those that might be excluded from the existing transitions pathway that exists for those with complex needs that Kenny references. And I just want to give the Council assurance that Perth and Kinross is the only representation where both adult protection and child protection are involved in that. And I think that gives a kind of key assurance to how committed we are to making sure that this is a key priority for improvement, both in adult protection and child protection. It's probably easier to say that it might be easier to identify the transition for those that might be subject to child protection into adult protection, but it needs to be broader than that, and we understand that the scope and the parameter of this work needs to be wider so we can make sure that those who require additional support moving from childhood into adulthood are able to access that in the easiest way.
Thank you, Councillor Smith, and then we'll go to second questions.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. My question is on page 195, hospital discharge. I noticed you can see the graph is taken up to March 22, and underneath you said that the team has taken the following actions to improve efficiency. Could you tell me just what has happened regarding that, please?
A lot of the efficiency centre around integration. I mean, we do have social workers based up in PRI in a team called the Hospital Discharge Team, and that supports people who require social care support discharged from hospital from PRI, Murray Royal, the community hospitals in Perth and Kinross, 9 Wells, and also people from Perth and Kinross are admitted to hospitals out with Perth and Kinross. That said, there is a discharge hub which consists of nursing staff mainly and other health professionals. And what we're trying to do is just to continue. I mean, to say they're not integrated isn't correct, but they are integrating and there's still a work in progress there, just to make sure there's no duplication and make sure people are being assessed by the right profession so they're getting the necessary skills, they're getting the appropriate support identified for their discharge, and then we get that support arranged. So in one word, it's integration is the answer to your question.
I'm just right in the middle of something like that just now, so thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to remind Council that this report was covering the period up to April 22. and we've had the whole of almost another year, and the position is actually quite different to what's presented in this report at this point in time, and there's been a significant amount of improvement work around delayed discharge, which is a major challenge for us locally, and it's a major challenge nationally. And there are other options that we're now employing in addition to what's listed here. I think the answer to that is going to take us probably a long time to answer it, but it's certainly something that we have a meeting later today in terms of bringing a report to the Housing and Social Wellbeing Committee on delayed discharge. So I would draw that to your attention when that comes forward.
Moving now to Councillor Ahern's second question. Sorry, Bailey Ahern's second question.
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. Again, a two-part question, but based around the same thing, and it's on the tables on page 170 and 171. And the first part is about the unborn baby referrals, 126, and then we see the table that 30 of those were registered on the protection register. Are they 126 individual cases, or do we see over the years the same woman coming back with referrals? And the second part is the child protection re-registrations, and I noticed the dip from last year, which I'm assuming was through the pandemic. And these re-registrations, are these failures of a family to cope, or is there a failure somewhere in the system where you pick it up when either statistics change or whatever change and you then pick it up, or is it, as I said in the beginning, down to the actual family itself?
Well, in relation to the first question, the number of pregnant women who are referred would be the 124, and when there's been sufficient concerns, if there's a pre-birth case conference, which there would be in those circumstances, then there would be a decision about whether or not child protection registration was required or not, and you'll see that it's a much smaller number from that overall 124. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that those women went without any support or any safety planning for that baby. That might be put in a voluntary measures or in a way that the parent themselves is quite happy to accept. So it would only be where there are sufficiently high concerns that the child would be registered on the child protection register. And in relation to the second question, which was about the re-registrations, thank you. The rise in the re-registrations, some of that was as a consequence of the COVID pandemic and the fact that we didn't have third sector partners in the community to be able to help support and monitor how children's safety was being delivered. Our own staff obviously were limited in what they could do too. So it was seen as a safety measure to have these children on the register so that everyone was aware of the risks that there may be around their safety. And so, that is something that we do monitor very regularly. We do not want children to be on the child protection register for any extended period of time, because that's unacceptable for the family, it's unacceptable for the child. So we certainly will want to see that continually reducing, and it's one of the things the Child Protection Committee monitor.
Thank you. We now have a second question from Bailey Williamson, and then the final second question from Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. My second question is about children having their teeth removed, and are we monitoring that and the numbers of children who are actually having the teeth removed and the reasons for that, and possibly the social implications that might surround that?
Yeah, that's also a really critical measure, and I think an indicator of neglect and a concern, so that not only ourselves but our health partners would be monitoring that quite closely too. There are a number of children who have to have a number of teeth removed, and I mean, that's certainly something that we would want to keep a close eye on. So yeah, that's something that is monitored quite closely too, and part of our child protection process would be that our health colleagues would provide us with with that information when it comes to their attention.
Go on, Jackie.
Thank you. I was just going to add, taking my Chief Social Work Officer hat on and putting the Chief Officer hat on, that Perth and Kinross IJB has the lead responsibility for the public dental service, and so there's very close links and a high degree of awareness around in the public dental service around the correlation between oral hygiene and neglect in particular. And they do a lot of health promotion across our schools as well. So there is connection and understanding in terms of the link to child protection. Yeah.
And I think Ian Wilkie wants to contribute to this answer as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again. Look, very quick answer. I do know from my own experience that each dental practice needs to have kind of updated and well understood child protection procedures as part of its registration.
Thank you. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. My second question is around I suppose recruitment. It's on page 217, sorry, I should have said the pack, around supported living services in particular. And I know this is almost a year old, this report, that the period we're talking to, but if anything in the intervening period, the recruitment and intervention by third-party providers has deteriorated. And I am aware of situations where people who receive care at home are left without any care at all or any support at all, which is a challenge. But I think linked to that is a question I think I've asked a previous committee about the recruitment of specialist social workers for some of these types of conditions. And I'm just wondering if you could perhaps give us an up-to-date position on both the recruitment of specialist social workers, but also what mechanisms are in place within Perth and Kinross Council to be able to ensure that people do receive the support they need if there is a shortage of staff working with our partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cole. I'm going to ask Kenny to respond to that in terms of the staffing issues. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of social workers, as Hazel said earlier, I mean, it is a challenge, but in general, we are able to recruit to social work posts, especially if they're permanent posts. In terms of specialist social workers, we've talked about the scope team for folk with learning disabilities and autism. You know, we prefer to recruit people with experience in that field if possible, but we do recruit newly qualified social workers, for example, and we do have a training framework for people to skill them up in terms of learning disability, autism, etc. So, you know, as long as we're recruiting, even if it's newly qualified, we can get folk in and train them up. So in terms of the social work side of it, you know, we're managing there, but it is a major issue in terms of the actual frontline social carers for, you know, people with learning disability and autism, and across all the client groups, including older people. Social care recruitment is a real challenge. And, you know, we've got numerous actions in place, you know, trying to enhance social media, just trying to get it out there that social care, you know, it's a career, and, you know, that it's a good career pathway. We have got pilots going where we've got enhanced rates of pay. We've got other pilots where we've got enhanced carer roles where people take on a wee bit more responsibility. In terms of recruiting people to care, specifically for people with learning disability or autism, that is, I mean, we've got our internal supported living team service. They've got a couple of vacancies at the moment, but they are in general managing to recruit there. There is a bigger challenge in the third sector, and again, we're working with our commissioning service just to look at ways of trying to improve recruitment and, as importantly, retention in those areas.
Deputy Provost, if I can ask a direct supplementary to that. Part of my question was really what mechanisms have we got in place to ensure that people who receive the support packages that they are deemed to require, if there's a lack of retention, what interventions are there from Perth and Kinross Council, and are you even aware if people are left without any support at all?
Yes is the short answer. We are aware if people are left without support. I mean, if we do have a provider who isn't, for whatever reason, at that moment in time or in the future are going to be unable to provide the support that they are meant to be providing, they will get in touch with us, and we will obviously prioritise and move carers across from other areas to meet that person's need. Obviously, it's all dependent on risk as well. You know, we need to obviously put our resources where people have the greatest level of risk. What we have with our scope team, which I've mentioned a number of times, we've got 6, as we call them, outreach workers. And again, they support the assessing workers and work with families and clients as well, primarily to try and enhance people's independence. But again, that is 6 full-time workers who can go in and support packages of care where maybe carers aren't available, at least in the short term, until we can get longer term arrangements in place. So in short, anybody who's at risk won't be left without care, will get care from somewhere.
Thank you for all the questions and replies. With no further questions, I will ask the council leader to move the report.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. The Chief Social Work Officer's report for the financial year of 2021-22 evidences the extent to which social care and social work services across all our services are supporting better outcomes for people who need our care and support. It covers the ongoing challenges in responding to the longer-term impact of COVID-19 in support of our most vulnerable and at-risk citizens. And it also describes the impact that this has had on demand for services and how teams are adapting. This council has a responsibility to make sure that our social care and social work services are delivered to the highest professional standards. The Chief Social Work Officer is confident that staff across all sectors have continued to manage and, where possible, minimise the impact of COVID-19. And I also am confident, as I'm sure all elected members are, of our staff in that regard. They've acted professionally and safely throughout this last year against a backdrop of significantly higher demands. Staff have experienced additional pressures in key areas, particularly in our front door services. This report also asks the Council and the Integrated Joint Board to keep staffing resources under review in order to meet increased demands. Nevertheless, the Chief Social Work Officer's assessment of performance is that overall, this Council continues to perform well in securing quality experiences for people who use social work and social care services. Continued investment in a skilled, adaptable and digitally aware workforce will be a priority for this Council, and this will be supported through the implementation of a more advanced and replacement case management system funded by the Council, which will go live from March 2024. As a Council, we all value and acknowledge how our social work and social care staff work tirelessly and in a person-centred way to make sure that the most vulnerable in our communities experience good quality care through trusting and meaningful relationship. This report shows the enthusiastic commitment of every member of staff and through our teams achieving this. I'd like to move this report.
Thank you. Can I ask the Deputy Leader to second the report?
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Once again, I'm proud to second this report without any additional comment. Thanks.
Thank you. At present, we have one request for comment. Bailey Ahern.
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. And I'd like to start off by saying thank you to everyone that's involved in putting this excellent report together. As Chair of the Community Justice and Community Safety Partnership, I would like them to pass on my thanks to all the staff, be they social workers or support staff within Criminal Justice Service for the work they do. This report highlights the large breadth of areas that social work services have to deal with. And I would like to concentrate most of my remarks on the Criminal Justice Service for obvious reasons. Perth and Kinross is rightly regarded as one of the best in the country in the work that our Criminal Justice Service does. Our community payback and right track programmes at West Bank are highly regarded and very successful for clients that pass through the programmes. Some pass through the programmes with professional qualifications and they end up in employment, which is a good success for those that have entered that programme. I've many times in the past praised the OWLS programme and how this has been looked at to be replicated elsewhere in the country. The partnership with the bike station last year takes this project to another step forward. Evolve, which is the MANS programme, continues to improve and works out of the Nuke, another very successful project within Perth City. The bail supervision programme continues to offer an alternative to remand, and hopefully with the interventions by a large number of organisations leads to a more positive outcome than having to go into remand. Violence against women continues to be a priority, and praise must be given to Hazel and her team within the Violence Against Women Partnership and the production of the 16 Days of Action, which included a number of very good sessions. Men on Violence and the seminar on bystander effect were particularly thought-provoking in a number of ways and focused my mind on what I see and do or not do and not see. Our unpaid work teams continue to be popular to go for local communities, and the work they do is exceptional and is very well received by all in our community, including all elected members here. Perth and Kinross continues to be a place of choice for a number of pilot projects, including those that are highlighted in the report, and that just highlights the excellent work that our council does. Within the Community Justice and Community Safety Partnership, we continue to go from strength to strength. We're a partnership that provides solutions as well as asking questions. And the two posters that you see on page 185 of the report have been well regarded and can be seen in offices and buildings across Perth and Kinross, as well as wider afield. One of them also appears in the Community Justice Annual Report. These two pieces of work clearly show our approach, as well as where we think we are doing well, where we need to improve, as well as where we need to go. And in this format, it allows workforces to see how they fit into the much larger picture outside of their organisation. Turning briefly to mental health, the consolidation of the service provision and integrated work arrangements with the community mental health teams and the NHS Tayside inpatient services is a very positive step forward. Thank you very much, Deputy Provost.
Thank you. I see no further requests for comment. Can we therefore agree the report? Thank you. That concludes our consideration of paper 8, and I will hand back to the Provost.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Item 9 is the King's Coronation Celebration on the 8th of May 2023, and Pauline Johnston, the Corporate Human Resources Manager, is going to introduce the report. Pauline.
Thank you, Provost. This report is submitted to consider the service delivery arrangements needed to allow the Council to commemorate the coronation of His Majesty the King Charles III. The UK Government, followed by the First Minister in Scotland, declared the 8th of May 2023 as a bank holiday. The Council previously converted public holidays to annual leave, with only schools continuing to have the early May bank holiday. Consultation with the ELT and unions has been undertaken, with differing opinions being discussed. A consistent approach across Tayside for schools was also sought, and the proposals and recommendations in the report allow this to be achieved insofar as all are recommending that schools will be closed on Monday the 8th of May 2023. The report is seeking approval for all employees of the Council to be given an extra day's holiday for Monday the 8th of May, with schools and other Council workplaces closed on this day. The UK early May bank holiday on the 1st of May will therefore be observed in schools, and schools will be closed on the 1st of May. Council essential services will be maintained on the 8th of May to ensure the Council can respond to any emergencies in our communities. And to ensure fairness and equity, a day's compensatory leave will be awarded to those employees who would not normally work on Monday the 8th of May and or are required to work to cover the essential services. If approved, we would require to write to the Scottish Government seeking approval to reduce the teaching year by one further day. We already did that for the Queen's funeral in September, and so that would reduce the teaching year to 188 days. I'm happy to take any questions on the paper.
Thank you, Pauline. Angus Forbes, Councillor Angus Forbes, please.
Thanks, Provost. My question is not specifically related to education, but I hope you'll indulge me. Do the Council have any plans to help communities celebrate this by, for example, producing omnibus orders for traffic control and that kind of thing?
So whilst the paper is quite specific about it being about workforce and annual leave, I can answer the question. So we are will provide enabling support to communities through things like the omnibus order if communities apply in the usual ways. So it will be available to them, and indeed any grants and funds that are available in general anyway, they would be able to apply for such purposes. Okay, I see no other questions on the report, and therefore I will come to the Leader of the Council to move the paper. Your microphone is not on there.
Maybe didn't want you to hear that. Provost, I'm pleased to move this paper to ensure that our staff and communities can participate in celebrating His Majesty the King's coronation in May. There will be 3-day celebrations to mark this event, commencing with the coronation on Saturday the 6th of May 2023. These proposals set out how we as a council can support our staff and communities to mark this occasion by adjusting our service delivery arrangements on Monday the 8th of May 2023. An extra day's annual leave is being granted to all staff to be taken on that Monday the 8th of May, and as we've heard before, essential operational services will be maintained, as well as emergency cover, as would be the case on other public holidays. Move the report, Provost.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leader. Deputy Leader to second.
Happy to second, Provost.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Leader. Councillor Leishman.
Thanks very much, Provost. As everyone is aware, the first Monday in May is International Workers' Day on May Day, and this year is the 45th year it's going to be celebrated in the UK. This holiday celebrates the international labour movement, and currently many workers in Britain are getting poorer as they are suffering from wage suppression and assault on their terms and conditions, and even an attempt to withdraw the right to take industrial action. We are currently a country very much in need, and the coronation is a completely pointless event in the respect that Charles is already king, and the inevitable pomp and pageantry of this coronation will cost the public a substantial amount of money that could be spent on vital public services. However, I digress. That is a debate for another day. I am glad that the 1st May bank holiday in schools is not to be moved. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Leishman, and of course all those workers who get double time on bank holidays will be grateful for an extra bank holiday if they're not off for the bank holiday. Councillor Kigali, please.
Yes, I hope on a significantly less dour note that we can also use that Monday specifically to celebrate and recognise the volunteers, especially in our communities. And I hope that Liz Smith and I have written to the Provost to see whether potentially we can have a special award for volunteering centred around that day that, you know, moving forward gives another opportunity to recognise the people that really make our communities tick and make this into something that's going to be long lasting and wide reaching in terms of its impact.
Thank you, Councillor Kigali. And yes, there are discussions underway around how we will recognise volunteers in our communities. And indeed, I've had discussions with members of your own group and other groups about that already so far, and we will have further to come. Councillor John Reddick, please.
Thanks, Provost. Just very briefly, I'd like to thank Pauline Johnson for her work in this matter, because it is quite a unique set of circumstances we find ourselves in this year with the death of the Queen and the coronation of King Charles, particularly when the 8th of May comes so near the traditional May Day bank holiday on the 1st of May. I'm very supportive of teachers and other school staff getting both days, and I thank Pauline Johnson and commend the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reddick. Councillors, can we agree the paper? Thank you. Councillors, item 10 is Perth Harbour Business Plan Update and Future Options Appraisal. As members agreed earlier, we have a deputation from Mr Simon Howie, and I would invite Mr Howie to come up to the podium here now for his deputation.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to come and speak today. We were very surprised last Friday when we read in the newspapers that there was a motion to close Perth Harbour, and that would be brought up at today's meeting. So I thought I would offer to come along today and perhaps answer any questions you may have from a harbour user's perspective. I and my son Ross are the owners of Calport, And Calport is a stevedoring and handling business based in the port, has been for 30 odd years. We've owned it for the last 15 years. And we bring ships and bulk goods into the harbour. We store them in our stores and deliver them to the customers. Perth Harbour's been a challenging asset for the council to own for many years, and we know that it's gone into the problem pile now. It's been run pretty much, from our perspective, we see it as having been run on a care and maintenance basis by the council, and we also recognise that an asset like this, you're damned if you spend too much money on it, and you're damned if you don't spend any money on it. It's a difficult asset. It needs dynamic ownership. I'm not exactly sure who that will be at the end of the day, but we'd very much like you to consider going for some soft selling options at the moment, taking some market soundings and seeing who would be out there for the port rather than closing it. There are a number of people who pay their mortgages and feed their children from the income they receive working in the port, and just closing it seems disproportionate. I think it's an asset that Perth's been very proud of over the years, but as we said, it's a difficult one now. When we look at airports, the ones that are in private ownership are doing very well, and we just need to look at Prestwick and we see that ones that are in public ownership are much more challenging because they're quite constrained, and as I said, they need dynamic ownership. So I'd like to open this up to any questions that as a user of the harbour. I'm not here to speak for all the harbour users because I don't have a mandate to do that, but I think I could represent them fairly and answer any questions you may have about what's going on in the harbour at the moment and why we think the harbour should remain open for business.
Thank you, Mr. Howie. I've got a number of questions, so I'll just take them in the order I've received them. Councillor Eric Drysdale, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Howie, and thanks for coming along this afternoon. I hear what you've just said in relation to why you're here as a user rather than a prospective purchaser of the harbour. I just wondered whether knowing what you do know about the harbour's financial position, do you envisage anyone and do you have anyone in mind who may be willing to take on the full responsibility for running the harbour, including being the statutory harbour authority with all the legal requirements in relation to harbour safety, making sure navigation channels are accessible and ensuring navigation aids are kept in place, and also, of course, undertaking the regular dredging required? Is there anybody that you can envisage that might take that on? And if I may, with your business experience, in your opinion, what would you consider the harbour to be worth on the open market?
Okay, so I think it's a matter of record that ports are good news, not bad news. Across the country, if you went out to try and buy a port, you would struggle to find any that are for sale. People who own ports and have invested in them have got very good assets and they work well. Perth is constrained in a particular way in that it's a narrow stretch of water. You know all the story regarding dredging and the challenges around that, but that's not unique. There are many river ports in the country that need to be dredged and have wildlife up the sides of them, and all the concerns around the environment and the like. So the answer is, I think there will be people out there who would be interested in buying the port. The responsibilities of running it are no different to any other regulated business in real terms. What it's worth, well, that remains to be seen, but I think that today is not about so much saying it's worth £1 or £1 million. It's about saying don't close the harbour until you know that someone isn't going to buy it. Let's go and test that properly, and if there are no serious takers for it, then that becomes Hobson's choice, and we understand that. There are obligations on the council, and we totally get that. Perth has a small river and a fairly small footprint within the harbour itself. The other thing is that there's been discussions in the paper that I saw around potential development within the harbour, and that just doesn't seem realistic. The ownership of the buildings are fragmented. Some's in common good, some's freehold with other people, and some are tenanted in long leases. So the idea that you could do something like develop a marina or into some leisure use, I think is fanciful. The other thing is that the whole harbour is out with the flood defence. So as soon as you went to do anything commercially, you'd be asking SEPA to say, can we build an asset for leisure use or otherwise, or domestic, that isn't flood protected. So I just don't think that's realistic. It's a viable port. The downside for any owner who comes along, if they only have the port as their means of income, is that they have to get the repayment for their capital spend back from port dues from ships coming up the river. An owner such as Forth Ports or other port owners that you see across the country, they don't necessarily need to make money from the ship travelling up the waterway, because they have the income from the buildings, stevedoring, the handling, and the dealing with the customer's goods. So they've got 3 or 4 irons in the fire. The downside for the council here is that the only way they can get any recompense is from a ship coming up and down the river, and even then you're talking £5,000 to £10,000 a ship, so it's not big money. To ask the council to spend £500,000 dredging the river to get a return like that is possibly unrealistic. So it needs to get out of the council's hands and into the hands of somebody who has a number of irons in the fire.
Okay, thank you. Bailey.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you for coming along, Mr. Howie. I think you've possibly touched on the answer to my question at the end there. My question was going to be, what you've clearly given this some thought. So what level of investment do you believe the harbour requires, both as a one-off and then in terms of ongoing investment, in order to turn it into a flourishing asset again? Thank you.
Well, I can't give you an exact figure for that, because in fact, probably some of your own officers could give you a closer figure. Anecdotally, I think it's not as low as £500,000 and it's not as much as £1 million. It's somewhere in between there. It doesn't have to be at the high end of that, I don't think. Previously what happened was that the Fair Maid was used to generally run up and down the river and keep an eye on any high spots as silt was building up. That has all stopped. It's a very much a care and maintenance type approach that the council has now. So I imagine that something like £500,000 would make a dent in it.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes.
Thanks for coming along to speak to us today. One of the issues seems to be lack of business, lack of customers. Are there customers out there that would use Perth Harbour? Do you know who they are, and how would we go about finding them?
Well, over the years, there's been a lot of discussion from the officers at the council about increased activity in terms of bringing people to the harbour, and I don't think that's particularly realistic for the council to do that, because they don't have the levers to pull to solicit new business. That has to be a business-to-business thing with the actual harbour users themselves. So, coincidentally, and we were just talking about that buses coming along, two significant past users of the harbour got in touch yesterday or in the last week to say they have an interest in bringing goods back through Perth. But the discussion always ends up back at what is the availability of water and the size of ships they can get up. So just to clarify for everyone, Perth is a tidal port and has what you would call reasonable water 1 to 2 weeks a month at maximum. And this isn't about the idea of dredging and increasing the availability of water, isn't about getting very large ships up. It's about getting the same ships up more often. So where there is 4 meters of water 7 days a month, if you dredge, you may have 4 meters of water 11 days a month, and that's a huge difference, and that's what Perth needs. So yes, I think there will be people out there who will come to Perth, and if they won't, we don't have a business, and I wouldn't be standing here today. You know, I genuinely believe that the right thing for Perth Harbour is to remain as a marine asset, not as a leisure one. So what comes first, the chicken or the egg? We've got to get this into someone's hands who's going to invest in it, and when the water availability is there, that's at the point where you can knock somebody's door seriously. There has to be an investment made first. The idea that saying you commit to coming to Perth and bring your goods here and we'll dredge the river, that's not a realistic way to bring new business to town. You're going to have to spend the money, open the shop, put the lights on, put the goods on the shelves, and people will come in. That's what's needed. And yes, I think they will come.
Thank you, Councillor Colin Stewart.
Thanks, Provost. Two questions, if I may. Thanks very much, Mr. Howie, for coming along on short notice, as I understand, if you just picked this up on Friday. Clearly, you think it's possible that there is a buyer out there. How long do you think, in your professional opinion, with a business hat on, it would take to put together a consortium? How long do you think that the council should do the soft selling that you were talking about?
I don't think it's a long process at all. I think that speaking to the 2, 3 or 4 obvious candidates would quickly give the council a smell test on, are these serious buyers? Are they people who would take the harbour and do something with it? I think it's unrealistic to assume that somebody's going to write a cheque for it, but if they would commit to spending the money and keeping it open and doing what it's doing, then that's a win. Because even if the council were to close the harbour, there's going to be a cash burn with it. It's an asset that's sitting there. There's going to be health and safety implications and a whole number of things that the council are going to have to continue to spend on. So if they could get someone to take that, and there's no reason why anybody should be taking this asset from the council and not giving a commitment, that if they don't meet that commitment, then it comes back to the council and all bets are off.
Thanks very much. And the second aspect, you said that as a user of the harbour, you'd read about this proposal first of all in the press on Friday. Am I to understand that harbour users were not consulted about the content of this paper before it was published?
There was a consultation process in the sense that we were asked about what our views were in terms of how the harbour should progress. But there was no mention that this was getting brought to the council and this was the outcome of the consultation process. We wrote to the council last year, I actually have a copy of the letter here, to the Harbour Board suggesting that we would, as a business, be prepared to actually spend the money on the dredging, or we'd be prepared to consider spending the money on the dredging, which would then be allowed to be clawed back over a period of time through using the harbour. So the increased usage and would then allow us to, there's a win-win situation for us. If we get the more ships that come up, the more products we can put through our buildings and keep our men busy. But we have the risk of having paid for the dredging. But it was offered and no response was given to that.
Thanks, that's very helpful. And just because you mentioned it at the end there, a quick supplementary. How many staff do you employ down at the harbour in total?
Well, we're a small business. There would be about, including our subcontractors, about 12 people involved, but only about five employees directly. It's not huge, but there are a lot of other people within the harbour who again too, if there was a better availability of water, would be able to use boats instead of transport. The other thing I would say too is that the council has allowed non-harbour related use to grow and grow within the harbour, and so in one respect you can understand it. Why would they be so hard on businesses about non-harbour related use when the waterway itself is constrained? So because the pushback from those users is, well, get the river dredged and we won't have to use non-harbour related activities. So with a properly managed, organised harbour, dredged, ready to go, and dredging isn't the only thing the harbour needs. It's like as if one press that button on dredging and it'll all go good. There's a whole bunch of things that need to be done to make this a really good going business, but it can be done. And there are not many bad harbour businesses in the whole of the UK. I don't know many harbours that don't do well.
Thanks, that's very helpful. Thank you. Councillor Bob Braun.
Thanks, Provost, and thank you, Mr. Howard, for your presentation and for your perspective on this, having been somebody that works at the harbour. We haven't mentioned the Fair Maid, which is I'm not sure if it's a boat or a ship or what you describe as, not an expert, but according to the paper, it's really now got no use. And I wonder what your thoughts would be about that, and if you felt it could be sold, how quickly it could be sold off.
I don't think that the first thing you would do if you took control of the harbour would be to sell the Fair Maid. You need something to go down and check the buoys, go down and work on the navigational aids. The Fair Maid was also used as a plough, so the council own a plough, and it was used to keep the mouth of the harbour open, which is now silting up to the extent if you go down on a quiet Sunday afternoon on low tide, you can walk from one side to the other, which is not good news in terms of the entrance into the mouth of the harbour. And previously, the guys just quietly worked away, keeping the sand moving so that in high tide, it suspended the sand and it just moved and kept it silted up. So that was a practical use of the Fair Maid. It's no, I don't think it's something you would sell immediately. I'm not sure why you would sell it at all. I mean, as a harbour, you need a boat to go and look at what's going on down your river.
Thank you. Councillor Frank Smith.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you, Mr. Howie, for coming along your defence of the harbour at the moment. A couple of questions I would like to ask. When you often look at a lot of other river systems and that, you see these long, very shallow drafted barges and that. Could we increase our capability with them? And the other question is, in the olden days, we used to have piles of sand piled up by, I think, the old Henry Ford. Is that a business that we could open up again? Thank you.
David Taylor ran a very successful Tay sand and gravel business. Yes, is the answer. There's a business there. There's a bunch of things you can do with this harbour. If you get up every day and your main focus is on what goes on in that harbour, you'll make a business out of it. You look at the successful SMEs around this whole district. It's where people's livelihoods depend on it, and they get up every day and do those things that just incrementally improve the business. There is a slight lack in shallow drafted ships that generally in Europe, but there are 4 or 5 large operators of them, with 4 or 5 ships each, who bump around between Iceland and Norway and Scotland and back and round, and they do this milk run of running around this part of Europe. So they are still there. You could look at, if you had a big enough customer, you could look at having a ship commissioned specifically to deal with the Tay. So a very shallow bottom boat, but they're not particularly stable out at sea. So it would have to be something that was going to be a coaster, which it's not obvious what that would be at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Drysdale, you have another question.
Thank you, Provost. And can I just come back to my previous question, just having taken a moment to assimilate what you said in response. I did ask whether, from your perspective, whether you would envisage any of the possible purchasers that you have in mind would be willing to become the statutory harbour authority legally required to ensure all systems to run the harbour safely are in line with the code of practice, to make sure that navigation channels are dredged regularly and accessible, and to ensure that navigation aids are kept in place. Do you envisage any of the prospective purchasers being willing to take on that legal responsibility?
Yes. I think that to take them seriously as a purchaser and an operator of the harbour in entirety, they would have to see that that's comes with it, and in some respects might make life easier for them, because without being overly pointed, the idea of the triangle of death, which is council, ownership and customers, trying to navigate all that together can be challenging. Whereas if someone were to buy the port or take control of the port, they should have, I mean, what should Perth have? It should have a good harbour master who can pilot the ships. He can be everything. He's an ex-ships captain. He knows all about marine standards and the like. He's an intelligent character who can deal with the regulatory side of things, perhaps have some consultancy support, and he can go and get on the boat at Dundee and pilot the ship up when required. So you've got this, and then as the business grows, we can certainly divest him of some of the things that he does, and he can then concentrate on other aspects. But at first, it's going to be all hands to the pump, because that's the only way that you're going to cut the spending that's going on. The income versus the expenditure in the harbour's out of kilter. So we made a bid for the harbour some years ago, 2 or 3 administrations ago, and it was decided by the council at that time that shouldn't be accepted. We're not absolutely dying to be the new owners of Perth Harbour, but we are very, very keen that it remains open.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. Just going back, I was involved in the harbour many years ago, probably turn of the century. It doesn't sound that long ago, but I'm surprised the way things are now, that it's difficult for the harbour if all the money is going to raise money from the buildings round about it. It's all going to the common good of Perth. It's not being distributed throughout the county or coming back to help the harbour out of its short-term difficulties just now. We had our own harbour master in those days. We ran a profitable business. We'd quite heavily involvement out with the director of economic development. Ken MacDonald. He was quite heavily involved in the harbour at that time, and there's other officers. We don't seem to have that involvement as much now. I suppose COVID's made its problems the last few years. Calport were on the board, I remember, many years ago. I think the future is if we can get the 60,000 in now and get some boats coming up and develop the trade. At one time, I remember we were shipping wheat up from Norfolk to Perth and then going down to Kirkcaldy to be milled. There's tons of trade, lots of trade like that that could be developed. But I say it's a problem getting this short-term problem out and get it taken over and developed.
Sorry,
because you're keen for business as well, aren't you?
Sorry to interrupt, Councillor Anderson. Is there a question here for Mr. Howie, or is it maybe a question for officers?
I just wonder how much of his mentions about the harbour being split up between people who could handle trade coming in to the harbour, to outside businesses, but still majority, I think, is owned or probably tenanted by people who could benefit from trade coming in on water. Is that correct?
No, well, there's around 20,000 square metres of buildings in the harbour. Calport control about 12,000 square metres of them. There's a timber company and there's a haulage company, and there was a second timber company that treated timber in there, and they've since closed. So there's a few empty buildings. It's not all the revenue doesn't go to the common good. There's some common good land. There's some freehold land. There's some leased land from Perth and Kinross Council. But let's not forget the business rates side of it as well. And there would have to be a discussion with the council around the fact that there's a bunch of these businesses, ours included, that pay rates on the basis that we have harbour related use. We have spent a large 6-figure sum of money re-roofing and dealing with floors and walls in our buildings to deal with big bulky goods coming in. They are specific for bulk animal feed and the like. The idea that these can just be switched off and used to make, furniture or otherwise is not realistic. So how does the discussion go with the tenants in there who say, we lease these buildings on the basis that you're going to run a port. You've closed the port. How do I run my business? And why should I pay business rates for something that I can't use for the use it was intended? So, there's a concept. We've just leased 2 sites from you as a council next to the Harbour Cafe and the old DP&L building that says specifically it's for harbour related use. And I'm standing here today facing you as members who may take a decision that you're going to close the harbour. So what do I do with these sites that I've just leased from you? So that's a dilemma for us. They're not insurmountable, and there are ways around these things perhaps, but for us it just seems disproportionate to be saying that the number one option here on the list is close the port.
Thank you. Councillor Welch.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Howe, for coming along. You're obviously a successful and respected local businessman. I guess I've got sort of two questions. You talked about potentially that the harbour being a success. As somebody who uses the waterways myself in a different form, what would you consider is the unique selling point for Perth Harbour in competition with other facilities? And ultimately, this council is under significant financial stress at the moment with immediate budget constraints and requirements to meet. So what would you recommend we do now?
If we had a joint call with a customer today, the council as the harbour owners and us as a large harbour user, the discussion would be proximity, as in you can come 20 miles up inland and be much more proximal to where you need the goods. You've got a large proportion of high bay warehouses that can take big bulky goods in and be stored in there in a very good environment, and a non-unionised port with a very, very proactive stevedoring and handling operation that will offload goods at 200 tonnes an hour. I know this sounds like specifics, but these are the things that matter to the people who want to come to our kind of buildings. You go down to other ports and they'll be offloading at 100 tonnes an hour because they're taking longer breaks and being more officious about how they do things. We have very much a can-do attitude. If that ship should sail at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then we start at 7 o'clock. We work through the breaks, and the ship's ready to go at 4. So you give the ship owners actually a very good experience. So therefore, when they're pricing the next job to come to Perth, they're much more aggressive about it, and therefore the person who owns the goods that are on that ship are more inclined to bring them to Perth. So it's all of those small things, about the same as any good experience you have in a hotel or in a shop or in any other public service. That's what we as a business have to do. And if we can't do that, then the customers won't come, because we're not Grangemouth. We are not the Port of Aberdeen, where if you want to come into there, you've got to come here. There are other options where Perth is concerned.
Thank you. Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Mr. Howie. If we decide to close the harbour this afternoon, what is to stop you finding a consortium of users or whatever to quickly put together a bid and take on the business, the full responsibilities of the business?
Well, if you decide to close the port today, you've decided to close the port. Whereas if you decided to go and look to market the port and find if somebody wants to buy it or take it, that's a different thing. I don't know why you would decide to close the port if really what you're saying is we'll close it, but we'll wait and see if somebody comes and tells us we shouldn't. So if that's what you're going to do, then to me, you would be backtracking by saying we're not closing the port, we're actually selling the port, and I think that's what you should do.
Thank you. Councillor Leishman.
Thanks, Provost. CalMac have been managing the harbour for a number of years, and the initial vision was close to what you described in response to Councillor Drysdale's question. Why do you think, in your opinion, that didn't succeed?
I don't think CalMac have failed. CalMac are doing what they're asked to do, which is keep the port safe, stop problems happening. I don't think they've done a bad job. They're an expensive option for what is a regulatory requirement by the council, but you're a council. You need to be safe, and there are things that it's easier for businesses of our size to do than it is for you as a council. It's probably not losing a lot more money than it ever has, but it hasn't proved any. CalMac haven't brought any new business to the harbour. They haven't got any real power or ability to bring new business to the harbour. What's the selling point for them? We're CalMac. Come to Perth. Okay, why? Well, nothing's changed. The water's the same. In fact, the water's getting more challenging because it's starting to silt up. They don't have any strings to their bow. The difference that any new owner would have to convince you was that they're not just going to be in the same boat in 3 years' time. They're saying, here's the keys back. They're going to have to demonstrate they've got the funds to invest, and a plan that says if they do that, it will progress. But the risk lies with them.
Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Provost. There's just two quick questions, if I may. Hypothetical questions, in fact. The choice in the paper is to close the port, the harbour, and turn it into some form of leisure facilities. And I've spoken to colleagues, and we've spoken before about it. I've thought the possibility of a marina. I'm a Londoner, of course. London Docklands comes to mind, but of course that's a big scale. But this Brighton Marina is another one which is small scale. Now, you mentioned this earlier, and the properties are under different ownership. But just to clarify, if hypothetically they were all under ownership, you were saying it's still not feasible to do it because it's outside the flood barrier. Is that right? So you couldn't really do it, make a marina there or anything there because of its position. Is that correct? Oh, sorry.
I don't see why you could have a marina. I don't see why you couldn't have a marina out with flood defence, because by the very nature of the things that are sitting in the water, they're there to handle that. So I don't think that should be insurmountable. But leisure use other than that, I mean, a marina is a car park for boats. There's no big money in marinas. It's what goes on round about it and all the associated activity. And let's say, for instance, the council did that and they did open a marina there. And then there's the users of the harbour are continuing, as they would have to bring in bulk goods by road. And you've got fairly major industrial processes going on next to a marina with the dust and all the things that are ending up on top. It just doesn't sound like it would sit perfectly well. Plus, it's tiny. If you actually have a look at the size of the harbour itself, reasonably long quays, but it's a very, very small marina, so the actual cash generation from that, I think, would be tiny. Notwithstanding the fact that you would still have to maintain the water course and do all the regulatory stuff that goes round with it.
If I may, just a second question is, just to clarify, if you were sitting here, then your option would be to maintain the harbour as it is with the council running it, but with the proviso we seek a buyer for it. Would that be your choice, to clarify?
Yes, I think that the council should agree today to go out and very quickly go round the houses and find anyone who would have an interest in taking this, and sit around the table with them and get a feel for that, then come back and report to the members if there's any serious takers for that. And if not, then it's the council's decision.
Thank you. Councillor Freshwater.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you, Mr. Howie, for coming in and for your insights. I just wanted to pick up on the question that Councillor Welch asked about competition. I remember 35 years ago when I grew up in Dundee, a plater saying that he was always complaining that ships would just go up to Perth because they were being undercut and they could get the jobs done more cheaply. But that's something which has been put forward here. Why would you come all the way up to Perth with all the trouble when you could just stop at Dundee and it's only 20 minutes on the road? Do you believe that the comments you made earlier about being able to provide a better service, does that apply particularly to Dundee? Obviously, you've got a vested interest in Perth, but would that apply to Dundee? Because it is a particular question that's been raised in regards to closing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Perth's in competition with Methil, with Dundee, with Grangemouth particularly. They would be the sort of the real competition. There are things that will come to Perth that Dundee wouldn't want. meal products, fish meal, animal products and the like. They're not particularly suited to Dundee. There are things that would go to Dundee that could never come to Perth because we just don't have the correct facilities. Competition's a funny thing. For some reason, a hotel down the road from another one seems to be getting all the business. Why is that? There can be a lot of soft reasons for that. Perth doesn't have serious muscle, but there's no reason why it can't be a really successful small port. But it won't be competing with Dundee and Grangemouth toe to toe, and never will, because for the obvious reasons of size. But if you want your goods, you know, if you take goods that are coming out of Aberfeldy or the new Varieties mine that's up there, the best place to take that product is to Perth. Absolutely. It's a very heavy product. The less road miles you can run it, the better. Dropping it on the port at Perth and sticking it away in 1,000, 1,500 ton lots is an ideal way to do it. You only need one of those a month, and 2 for something else, 3 for something else, and all of a sudden you've gone. It's not that long ago we had 40 boats one year, and then all of us, but the person who brought the bulk of those boats up gave us a choice. Look, you need to give us a site that you're going to have this river dredged, or we're going to go to Grangemouth. And they said we would rather come to Perth because the experience is better for us dealing with an SME than it is with a big national like Forth Ports, who are very good at what they do. I'm not here to be disrespectful to Forth Ports, but we did a great job for them, and the council said we cannot give you a guarantee that we're going to dredge the port. Subsequently, they then said they would, but didn't. But by that time, they'd moved away to and that will come again.
Thank you. Deputy Provost, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Howe, for coming in and answering all our questions and giving your presentation. Can I ask if you believe that the COVID pandemic and our national economic circumstances really since the start of 2020 have contributed materially to the present condition of the harbour, and if we had no COVID, and perhaps our economic circumstances had been different, the harbour might have continued to improve? Thank you.
I don't think there has been a marked downside due to COVID. No, the kind of users that use Perth Harbour weren't particularly affected by COVID that I can imagine.
Thank you, Mr. Howie. And one final question from the Deputy Leader, which will be very concise and short.
I'll try. Mr. Howie, in your view, what impact will the new free ports elsewhere in Scotland have on business that might or might not choose to come through the River Tay, Dundee and Perth, when there are the benefits of the free ports elsewhere? And also, you indicated that you previously were a potential purchaser. Can you clarify whether that potential purchase would have entailed all the legal, taking ownership of the legal side and all the issues that I raised previously?
On the free ports one, I'd probably be more positive than negative about it. So what you're suggesting that potentially Perth can't offer what other ports can because they have free port status. I don't think that's that relevant to Perth. In fact, you could argue that the ports will become busier with more of the larger engineering items that might come towards a free port that might be pulled into the country because of the free port status. The kind of users that are going to use Perth, I don't think free port status would have made a material difference. It might have helped if there was a rates-free zone, so users like us might have benefited slightly because we might have had a rates-free period, but not our customers, I don't think. As far as our bid previously for the harbour, it actually related to taking ownership of some of the freehold properties, some of the leasehold properties, and taking over the responsibilities of the full responsibilities of running the harbour. So the council were basically completely divested from it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Howie, for answering all of those questions. It's greatly appreciated, and for coming along today. Thank you. Okay, members, we're going to have a 5-minute comfort break at this point before we begin consideration of this item, which is expected to be quite lengthy. So 5 minutes, resume at just the back of 10 past. Thank you for your patience, members. We are on item 10, Perth Harbour Business Plan Update and Future Options Appraisal. David Littlejohn, the Head of Planning and Development, is going to introduce the report.
Thank you, Provost. The report the Council is being asked to consider today has two objectives. Firstly, it provides members with a progress update on delivering the Perth Harbour Business Plan, April 2021 to March 2026, as approved by the Strategic Policy and Resources Committee in September 2021. Secondly, it provides members with the outcome of the operational review of the harbour as agreed by the Finance and Resources Committee in September 2022. As a consequence of these two reports, which are attached as appendices, the preferred option and recommendation to members is to close the harbour to commercial vessels and in doing so focus on alternative uses of the river, quays and some of the surrounding land. Turning to the business plan progress update, the report notes that good progress has been made in delivering the first strategic objective to operate the harbour safely and effectively and to comply with the Port Marine Safety Code, although further work remains to be done around pilotage services, navigation and dredging. Limited progress has been made in delivering the second strategic objective to reduce the operating deficit over the life of the business plan and to turn around the harbour to become a self-sufficient business that generates an operating surplus. Several external shocks have hampered progress and the report sets these out. The report also discusses the various internal constraints faced by Perth Harbour, the most pressing of these being the loss of income from chartering the Fair Maid. Fundamentally, unlike many other commercial ports, Perth Harbour is unusual in that core income is only generated from dues paid by tonnage landed or shipped out, and in recent years by chartering out the Fair Maid. Rental income from surrounding land and warehousing largely flows to the Perth Common Good Fund, and the land use is mostly unconnected with the harbour. There's also an index-linked contract fee with performance bonus paid to Calmac Harbours to manage the day-to-day harbour operation and generate new business. And this is regardless of the number of vessels transiting the Tay to Perth. In 2022-23 financial year, 5 vessels to date have landed goods at Perth, compared with the 80 vessel movements required to meet the business plan target and the 120 vessel movements required to break even. This number of vessels was last achieved in 2010. The review concludes that costs will continue to increase and income will remain volatile to the extent that the operating deficit is unlikely to be reduced to any significant extent without a seemingly unfeasible increase in vessel movements. In the current financial year, the deficit is currently in the order of £280,000 and projected to be just over £300,000 by financial year end. Officers fully appreciate that this is not an easy decision. However, they have undertaken the review objectively to reach the recommendation presented to you today. I should add that the legal process required to close the harbour will take some time, and in the interim, marketing of the harbour to potential interested parties could still be undertaken. I should also add for clarity that when the harbour was previously marketed, the sole interested party, Calport, made an offer that did not include assuming the full legal liability for the harbour. I should also clarify that the second interested party, Forth Ports, their interest was on the basis of closing the harbour and relocating the 2 remaining businesses to Grangemouth, just for clarity. I'm sure you will have many questions which we will endeavour to respond to. And to assist me, I'm joined by the report author, Serge Marone, and by Calmac Harbours Head of Harbours, Michael Blacklaw. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Littlejohn. Councillor Donaldson.
I hadn't intended to come in quite so soon, but I hit the return button. But let's cut to the chase. The Finance and Resources Committee approved the review on the 7th of September last year for Perth Harbour operations for consideration by elected members. And rightly, it has come back to full council, and it's almost exactly 5 months on. The report 4.4 sets out the role of Perth Harbour Board, and it states clearly that it is an advisory board, and from all I can see doesn't have legal responsibilities either with regard to the harbour or for the Tay down I think it's as far as Balmerino. Nonetheless, can I just ask, what level of consultation, I may have a supplementary on this, what level of consultation and engagement has there been with the authors of this review with the Harbour Board? And quite simply, as an advisory board, what opportunities have been given to members of that board to provide advice?
Okay. Thank you for the question.
That Serge Marone can answer.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Mullen, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you for the question, Councillor Donaldson. Following the decision of the Financial Resource Committee in September, a draft scope of the review was developed, and that draft scope was shared by the board, with the board in October, November. Following that, the officers worked out the different options, and there was a different consultation, but the board was not consulted on the final version of the option appraisals and on the final recommendation. Hope it answers your question, Councillor Nelson.
Okay, can I do just one supplementary? That'll be me. Then, from what you're saying there, the board, as an advisory board, will only be consulted on the final version of this report until after the decision is taken here today. And it states, requests that the Perth Harbour Board considers the report and develops a timescale and plan, so on and so forth. But added to that, not just with the advisory board, can I just ask, with harbour users, and we've heard from Simon Howie at Calport, but there's other users obviously as well, what degree of consultation engagement has there been with them, and what degree have we already looked at potential options for a possible sale? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the follow-up question, Councillor Nelson. In terms of the going back to the board, there was a special session organised last Friday with the board to discuss the report and the recommendation in the report. In relation to Harbour users, in the report you've got a table highlighting the different feedback we have had from the users in terms of possible cargoes and forecast use of the harbour, and that was integrated in the report. In relation to potential buyers, we've not done specific consultation on that aspect, although as David Littlejohn mentioned, we had the experience of the first marketing of the harbour a few years ago.
Right, I think others will have questions asked, but.
Thank you, Billy Heron.
Thank you very much. I refer to the table on page 240, which is the options appraisal results. I noticed that rank number 3, option 1B, is the only one that says it's medium risk and all of the others are high. If it was high, if option 1B was medium risk, why has it got the score it has? And why have we got high risk ratings against all the other options?
Thank you, Councillor Aaron, for your question. The reason why we have a medium risk rating for option 1B is because we know more about that option, because that's the current option we are working on. So we've been able to work more on the risk, and obviously we've been able to introduce mitigation measures to reduce the risk. All the other options have been ranked high because more work will need to be done to reduce that risk. But it is unlikely that any of these options will go as a low risk.
So how come it didn't reach a higher rating or weighted score?
So the assessment was done first of all on the scoring and on the weighting score, and the risk assessment was done separately from the scoring, the weighted score. So that's why you've got two columns there in the table showing the weighted score, but also the risk rating. And I think in relation to it's the balance between the option weighted score and the risk.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Peter Barrett.
Thanks, Provost. Mr. Howie essentially made a pitch for option 3A, but didn't address any of the reasons why option 3 should be better, or dispute any of the assessed criteria with regard to option 5. And I wonder if Mr. Littlejohn can remind us of the main advantages that option 5 has over option 3 in terms both of risk and particularly of finance.
Mr. Barrett.
The fundamental difference, I suppose, between the two options, and they were closely ranked in the options appraisal, is back to in terms of option 3A as a standalone preferred option. I think the downside of that was we generally couldn't see any upside for any private operator taking on the harbour, given the amount, the vast increase in the number of vessel movements that would be required in order to break even, on the assumption that a consortium of one or more businesses were in it to make some, at least make some profit out of it. So that's why that option itself was not scored as highly. Option 5A for option 5 for the council's perspective removes removes most, to be fair, of the operating costs. There would still be some periodic maintenance required of riverbanks and quayside, but it would allow the harbour to remain in public sector ownership as part of Perth's heritage, but allow the water and the surrounding area to a point to be used for other uses, such as informal leisure, whether it's marina, whether it's kayaking, whether it's opening up access to the island, whatever it is. But that, to us, in the work that we undertook, suggested was the best option. So it's not about making money. I think Mr. Howie is right that a marina of itself would not generate vast amounts of income, but it would certainly remove the financial burden from the council, and that's why that option ultimately scored more highly than option 3A, which, if a purchaser or a set of purchasers came along and they somehow managed to turn the harbour around, questions over the long-term viability of that model, and of course, unless it was leased and that option was about selling it, control would ultimately be lost as well.
Councillor Waters.
So, sorry, just to withdraw my question there. I think in David Littlejohn's answer, he covered that. I may come back later.
Thank you, Councillor Redbeck.
Thanks, Provost. I hope this is not a naive question, and Mr. Littlejohn very helpfully touched upon it a little bit in his introduction to the paper. If option 5 is taken and that the port is agreed that the harbour will close, if in the process of that closure there's a very specific, if somebody comes along looking to to buy the harbour from us. Is it possible that that serious offer will be appropriately considered and fairly reviewed if it's a serious offer? That's a long-winded question. What I'm saying is, if somebody wants to buy the harbour during that period of closure, will we seriously entertain that, please?
Yes, if that's the decision of the council, but it's not officers' desire to see the harbour closed. It's the closure being the only potentially viable option. If someone does come along and presents a credible alternative, then I think we would want council to absolutely consider that alternative.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rebeck. Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, convener. The plots around the harbour are mainly industrial. Is there a demand for industrial plots in Perth so that if plots in the harbour that are related to the harbour were converted to other industrial uses, would there be a demand for those plots?
Yes, in general terms, there is an undersupply of shed space in and around Perth. But as Mr. Howie, I think, pointed out earlier, and I think it's clearly in the paper, almost all of the land at the harbour is under long ground lease. And when I say long, I mean kind of 60 plus years in some case. So it would be for the occupiers, the tenants, if you like, of those sheds to either sublet them to anybody else or enter into discussions with the council as landlord about relinquishing leases. None of the leases at the harbour are restrictive. There are no leases that restrict anything that happens at the harbour to harbour business only. All of the leases are class 4, 5 and 6. So to all intents and purposes, in planning terms, the land and buildings around the harbour are an industrial area.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Colin Stewart.
Thanks, Provost. I think I have two questions, but on very different themes for Mr. Blacklock. That's great. The first is I just wonder what consultation or engagement there was with CalMac as the operators in preparation of this report.
Hiya, thanks very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, okay. So we were approached with the report to look at the factuality of the volumes of traffic and things like that. In that sense, that's how we looked at it. It wasn't for CalMac to offer an opinion on the outputs or options of the report, but we were asked to look at the technical aspects of it as to volume traffics and other ports and things like that.
Okay, thanks very much. And I just wonder, since we entered into the arrangement with you at CalMac, what work has been undertaken on market development, and what operations are there? What options are there in the future, should the port remain open, for future market development?
So since CalMac took over, we continue to look for new business, but I think as Mr. Howie touched on earlier, we're fairly limited in what we can offer as who we are. We have the asset there to be used, but rely on other companies to provide stevedoring and the connecting services. We continue to try and source business for the harbour, but we always seem to come stuck upon the dredging matter that we have, and I think that's where we know there's an issue, and that's where the trip up tends to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. And Mr. Blacklaw has sort of touched on what I was going to deal with. It seems to me that throughout the report, for instance, page 236, the market, current restrictions at the basin entrance are making operations less viable, which could be addressed with phase 1 and 2 dredging. So we're discounting business purely on the dredging aspect. I've been here before, Weymouth and Portland, when I was on the council there. and dredging was always an issue with ferry operators. It's important, and regardless of where we are as a port authority, it would be incumbent on us to keep the harbour entrance. I say the harbour, but it's the river. Silt free, I would have thought, and there would require a level of dredging. So my question is, I know we dredge from the I'm led to believe the rail bridge at Dundee upwards. Are we held to ransom by what happens on the seaward side of that bridge, and who's responsible for that, please? Thank you.
I can answer, and colleagues might want to bring any technical knowledge. Just to clarify, that the council is the harbour authority and responsible for the navigation of the Tay from the Tay Bridge at Balmerino back to Perth. We don't dredge the entire depth of the channel. We actually, I don't think any of us can remember when the channel was dredged to a much deeper depth. There is a major constraint on the Tay. There's a couple of the national oil and gas pipelines across it, and they have to be protected. It's a protected zone, and we will never be able to dredge the Tay to a very deep draft that would allow ships of a certain length, but a bigger draft to come up the Tay. So it's always going to be restricted to a point. So that's a really important point to bear in mind. I think what we're mostly talking about is the harbour mouth area, and that's in the paper you'll see that's the phase 2 dredge. That is something that doesn't have to be done very often, and that's in the ballpark of £300,000 to £800,000 to do that harbour mouth dredge. The phase 1 dredge is just removing natural silt that builds up in the Tay, and that's a much lighter. It's a one-off capital dredge, and actually probably in truth, and Mr. Howie referred to it historically, a periodic removal of lighter silt using the Fair Maid. But we're at the stage now where a £60,000 capital dredge has to be undertaken, and then thereafter a kind of less frequent lighter touch. Beyond that, if we really did want to increase the draft, that's the much more expensive phase 2 dredge.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Provost. My question was about the Fair Maid and what its current situation is, and is it within our own waters now? And I was going to ask that question. You talked there about the dredging using the Fair Maid, but just have an update on the Fair Maid position, please.
That's one that Serge has got the latest position on.
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Duff. Maybe Michael may also come in if he has any complementary there. At the moment, the Fair Maid is still at the yard, but because we are waiting for some parts to be delivered and to be assembled on the Fair Maid. But that hopefully should be done in the next few weeks, and all the work will have been done now on the Fair Maid, so the Fair Maid would be able to come back to Perth.
Councillor Liz Barrett.
Thank you, Provost. It's my understanding that it was suggested by Mr. Howie that we have to spend £500,000 to £1 million to have any hope of selling the harbour, and then if whoever took it over didn't manage to make it work, they might give it back to us. Is that other people's understanding, or have I picked that up wrong?
It would be my recommendation to council that we don't enter into an option that allows someone just to hand the keys back if it doesn't work. I would suggest if council wishes the harbour to continue in operation, it would be on the basis of selling it or a very long lease. I mean a very long lease, in order to give any commercial operator a fair chance. I wouldn't recommend any option that requires or involves the council continuing to make significant expenditure on whether it's dredging or navigation or any other of the aspects that are a statutory requirement. So, you know, I can't read Mr. Howie's mind, but in terms of the amount of money that he estimates that needs to be invested, that's his opinion. If he's referring to the phase 2 dredging, that probably is in that ballpark. If it's around, there is a shortage of laydown space for anything that's being transshipped in Perth. There's one large site where we did demolish the ramshackle shed. It's called the Harbour End store, but there's a significant, I think we're actually talking more than $1 million, when the council previously rejected investment in that site to make it into a proper hard standing or laydown space, as it's called. But I wouldn't be able to comment any more than that, Councillor Barrett.
Okay, thank you. So if we're moving to closure, but being willing to sell it in the meantime, it would be selling it in the meantime as is, without spending more money that could be good money after bad.
Again, it would be a matter for council to decide if that was an option it wished to do, whether to sell or lease, and in what condition. Again, making a significant capital investment and then leasing it might be the only way to get someone to take it on, but until we market tested, I suppose, we would not know the condition, you know, that any potential lessee or purchaser would place on the council. So I think council would need to think very carefully about the conditions around leasing and selling and what might be required as an expenditure.
Thank you, Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Provost. There was mention in the papers about rents going to the Common Good Fund. How difficult would it be to transfer those to the harbour? I presume the Common Good Fund would have to approve it in some way. But I mean, if the properties are within the environs of the harbour, surely they should rightly get the rents for it.
I think I alluded it was, you know, unusual to have the land asset of land and property separated from the harbour operation, because most port operators generate most of their income from land and property. You know, for example, look at Forth Ports. You could argue it's a property developer as much as a port operator. That would be a matter for both the Common Good Committee and the council. The land is held in common good. And therefore it would require a full public consultation and an application to the sheriff in order to change the status of that land, for example, to either sell it or transfer it into the general fund. And that has been and always was one of the principal barriers at Perth Harbour. That would be a matter for council to consider a way through that, but it's £75,000 or in the order that is generated annually, and that would continue, as I said before, because most of the land and buildings are simply used as general industrial and business space. So there's no risk to that income by any decision relating to the operation of the harbour per se.
Sorry, could I just to squeeze supplementary? Is there anything then to stop the Good Fund passing some of those funds back to the harbour as a shortcut?
Yes, there is. So the Perth Common Good Fund, and if you bear with me 2 seconds. So the overall purpose of the Perth Common Good Fund is to support projects which provide benefits to the resident of the common good area, benefit in principle. The key criteria, which would be, it says 8.2, which states the Perth Common Good Fund should not be viewed as a resource to supplement the funding of council services. Applications for financial assistance from council services are therefore not encouraged. Any application submitted by a council service will be considered by the Perth Common Good Fund Committee on its own merits. And I believe there has been an application in 2015 for 58,000 for the demolition of the Harbour End store that was indicated earlier. Happy to, I think that covers the question. Yes. Okay, thank you. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Provost. You've recommended option 5, closure as a commercial port and regeneration. In the blurb after that, you mentioned why the closure should happen, but you've not actually mentioned anything about regeneration. How do you see the regeneration of the harbour, and how much are you talking about? How much money are you talking about to regenerate the harbour?
We haven't done a lot of work at this stage in looking at the long-term regeneration. I think didn't want to kind of presuppose that that was the conclusion that would be reached. We would want to kind of master plan the area. Some work was done a number of years ago. I think Mr. Howie alluded to the flood defence system, and that's absolutely correct. Certainly within the flood defence system, there could be no new, for example, residential development. However, realistically, I don't see residential development as being part of the long-term regeneration of the area. I think it would be a mix of business space, offices, perhaps some hospitality, informal leisure, as I said, perhaps linking across to the island, looking at river use, water sports, kayaking, all within the immediate harbour area. I think it can be done safely without impeding on some of the kind of industrial business that takes place in and around the harbour. But we need to kind of go into this with our eyes open and kind of master plan what that could be. Waterfront regeneration, which I've had some experience over my career in Aberdeenshire and Shetland, is a long-term process. Dundee waterfront alone is 30-year vision to regenerate, and it's about halfway through. So it's long-term, and it's about the careful consideration as and when leases come up for renewal, as and when businesses leave, just careful thought about the best use for that asset as and when that's an opportunity. But it would be a long-term process. But I think there's some real potential for informal use in and around the harbour in the interim period.
Billy Herman.
Thank you very much, Provost. When we brought CalMac on board to run the harbour with us, and I'm not going to go into details of the contract, but there was an incentive there to bring in business. Since 2018, when that happened, and before, what have officers done, council officers done, to go out and look for business, as it was down to the economic development team to do that, and not CalMac, as we've already heard in the contract?
I can ask Serge to come in on this. We've done what we can in terms of our own expertise. Part of the reason for outsourcing much of this to CalMac and allowing CalMac to directly employ the required harbour staff was because we don't have the expertise. It's not core business of a local authority to run a harbour. In fact, I think as the report picks out, other than some of the smaller fishing ports, there are only 3 harbour council-owned harbours in Scotland, 2 of which are Sullom Voe and Flotta, which are oil-based. So it's not a usual expertise for council officers to have. But Serge can probably say a little bit more about what the Invest in Perth team have been able to do over the past few years.
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Aaron, for your question. Yeah, we've worked with CalMac since the beginning of the contract, in partnership to attract, to secure cargoes coming and also attract new cargoes. So we pursued any leads we had in relation to these new cargoes. For instance, the aggregate which was needed for the 85 work was attracted through these contacts, and we were able effectively to use the harbour to transport that we also looked at other new cargo like wood ship, which obviously triggered the issue of storage and environmental health and so on. So, but we've explored all options which came, to our knowledge. We also promoted, the harbour through, through the website and through any social media element. We also, at each time we had meeting with businesses which were potentially transporting cargoes, for instance, waste. We worked with them to see if it was feasible, but unfortunately there was always a constraint, a challenge which didn't allow us to materialize and land the contract.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Provost. I'm interested in the pipelines. They seem to be a bit of an inconvenience for us. I'm wondering, back in the day when they were first put in, did we get any money from whoever owns the pipeline, or did they make any commitments to maintenance and doing perhaps any dredging round about them?
And I don't know the answer to that at the moment. We will have a record somewhere, unless Serge does have some insight into the. I think it's BP and Shell from memory.
Yes, that's correct. It's INEOS, and but I think the pipeline are in the riverbed, which is owned by the Crown Estate. So they are obviously benefiting from that location there. That was at the time of Teesside Regional Council, when there was some agreement there, but there was no agreement for the operator of these pipelines to contribute towards the dredging. On the contrary, effectively, they had to be consulted on any changes to the riverbed, because obviously they be concerned, the health and safety concern there.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert.
Yes, thank you, Provost. My question is probably a daft laddie question, but I'm trying to understand just exactly what a harbour is. I mean, we're talking about closing it as a harbour. It doesn't disappear. So can small dinghies and other boats use it? Do we still have to maintain buoys if we're not having a harbour down? I think it was mentioned that down the Tay estuary and so on. So I'm just trying to work out exactly what it would look like were we to close it.
It's not a daft question. I think it's a reasonable question. It would look pretty much as it does just now. There's a formal process to be gone through to revoke the Perth Harbour Act effectively. And that harbour closure order is what we need to pursue. That would remove the legal liability and the legal duty of the council to maintain the navigation of the Tay from Balmerino to the railway bridge in Perth. We would not be required to install, maintain, replace the navigation lights, the aids. There are some buoys in the Tay which would probably just leave. There's no harm in them. They're not a shipping obstruction. We would still, as a council, require to maintain the quays as and when required, because they're part of the flood defence network. But in essence, there's nothing preventing leisure users from using the harbour. The challenge at the moment is the two are not compatible, and you can't have a situation where there are leisure users regularly using the harbour area with any imminent arrival of a commercial vessel. So the closure of the harbour is to commercial traffic. It would remain available for any non-commercial traffic, or any other operator that wants to use the Tay. Doesn't preclude passenger boats coming up from Broughty Ferry up the Tay. It doesn't preclude any of that. It's just not formally maintained as a commercial navigation channel by the council or anyone else.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. I actually do have one more question. It's on the timeline on pages 30, or page 314 to 316. I think if we were to pass option 5 today, it then goes to a consultation process under, what is it, the Harbours Act 1964. But that consultation process, is that determined entirely by Scottish ministers, Scottish government, or do we have any role in that in terms of, and basically after consultation process and then with Scottish ministers, I don't think UK ministers are involved because it entirely devolved, but how long is that process, would you estimate, likely to take? And we'd still have leeway within that period. It could be 2 months to 6 months.
You're absolutely correct. I'll ask Serge to clarify because he's closer to the legal position. It's a statutory process with a minimum period of consultation. How long that extends to would be, I think, something for the council to choose. How long beyond that it chose to consultate or to accelerate the process. But there is a minimum period of consultation that's required. And of course, I think during that process, the council can start or stop it if it chooses to do. It's not a process that is irrevocable. So it could be halted if that's the right thing to do. But Serge will possibly have more detail on the statutory timescale.
Yes, just to add on David's points there, the only statutory, if you want, timescale in terms of the consultation are the 42 days for the period of consultation from the public notice, but that can in some way be paused depending on the objections or the number of further information that the applicant could provide to the objector. So that there's no set timescale for that, although there are set timescale to provide the information and provide the answer and for the objectors to come back on that. But it is likely to take a few months and unlikely to be completed before July.
Okay, thanks. And that statutory process of consultation, and you've listed some of the possible parties, but that statutory process, does that preclude us ourselves carrying out consultation and engagement with local counterparties?
No. We could run several processes in parallel. It doesn't impede on that at all. I know I didn't answer one of your previous question. That it is a Transport Scotland decision. Ultimately, they would make a recommendation to Scottish ministers after the end of that consultation period and the consideration of the objections. The process encourages any objections to be resolved. So we would go through a period of trying to resolve some of the objections. It's only if that, when that process is exhausted, Transport Scotland would then consider the revocation order, and they themselves might have a period of inquiry, which is possible, and ultimately would make a recommendation to Scottish ministers. So I think Serge is correct that in the absence of any objections, it might be a shorter period, but we can control that period of time. If there are objections, then there is a process in train that may take some time. But we could, as you quite rightly suggested, do some parallel consultation of our own around a different outcome, if that's what's minded.
You could be talking of 6 months thereabouts, yeah. Just a kind of rough figure.
Yes, I think that's reasonable.
Thank you, Councillor Colin Stewart.
Thanks, Provost. I think I've got a question about cost and a question about consultation. Just to be absolutely clear, Mr. Littlejohn, there's no price tag associated with any future development or regeneration, or as envisioned under option 5. But separate from that, there would be ongoing costs in terms of maintenance of the actual structures to make sure that they didn't wash away into the Tay, for example.
There would be a price tag in regeneration if the council was minded to make expenditure in regeneration. Just for the sake of argument, if the council chose to install pontoons for a marina, that would be a cost, or whether it left it to a private operator to do, whether the council chose to redevelop some of the land in its ownership, either in the general fund or the common good fund for a different purpose, there might be a cost related to that. But these would be investment decisions in that scenario that we made at the time and on the basis of an investment decision. You'd asked about the ongoing cost would be relating to the riverbank, just as it is elsewhere in the Tay. If there's a piece of repair work needing done, that would be something that the council would be liable for, and just treated through the kind of maintenance budgets for roads and structures. But not, I mean, it wouldn't be a regular occurrence. It would be as and when there would be a maintenance or a repair issue needed. The riverbank it's a inevitable at points. There will be some erosion. There will be some repair, as there is just now.
Thank you. And just on consultation, I mean, the report before us says that, for example, CalMac were consulted, but it seems that they were asked just to verify the accuracy of the numbers. You know, we've heard that there was a request for a meeting from CalPort where they were offering to pick up some of the dredging costs, however that might have been repaid afterwards. I'm just wondering whether we're satisfied with the scope and depth of the consultation, and whether in actual fact, given that, you know, today we've heard that there's an option, you know, a consortium could come forward very quickly, potentially, whether actually we've explored necessarily all of the options and in sufficient depth with all of the users and interested parties.
Serge would need to answer, you know, specifically on the conversations with CalMac. Remember, there are very few users. I think there are currently 2 users of the harbour. You know, following today, it's not the end of a process. It's the beginning. We talked about formal consultation, so that would come, and it doesn't preclude any views being considered, but it's still the you know, the evidence view of officers that, regardless of those views, that the council cannot sustain and develop and turn around the harbour. If someone else can, I think that's absolutely fabulous. But I think, you know, the consultation to this point, we've looked at, you know, 5 options and a series of variations of the options. I'm not sure what else would have been gained by kind of inviting you know, a different set of individuals to provide a kind of wider range of opportunities. Their views will be heard as part of the consultation moving forward from today, if that's the council's decision.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Provost. I do have a question, but I just want to clarify one response that Mr. Morone gave to an earlier question by Councillor Donaldson, and he said that there was a consultation last Friday with the Harbour Board. That was a hastily arranged and very responsive action when the Harbour Board realised that this paper was complete. They'd never seen it, and that a briefing was to be made to the whole council cohort in advance. As it turns out, both of those briefings for the whole councillor body and indeed for members of the Harbour Board, I wasn't able to attend because we're at such short notice and I had prior commitments that I couldn't change. So I wanted to make it clear to my fellow councillors that that was not what I would consider to be an adequate consultation with the Harbour Board at any point in this process. But my question really is on page 438, item 4.16, and I would like to ask Mr. Littlejohn specifically, at what point did officers come to the view that the current approved business plan could not be delivered? And why was no consideration given to bringing that emerging view to the Harbour Board for their consideration and indeed advice going forward? Thank you.
The Harbour Board received regular management accounts that set out the entire cost of running the harbour. That's something which historically was never done, but for the past, I think, probably 3 years, management accounts have been produced to the board, and then those management accounts, it was clearly set out the levels of income that were being generated, as opposed to the levels against the levels of expenditure, with some projections as well. So I would probably disagree that the Harbour Board weren't cited on the financial state of the harbour, which could only be turned around by an increasing number of vessels. So I think it would become more obvious that the business plan targets were not going to be achieved given the series of regular management accounts that were prepared.
Councillor McCall, your microphone's not on.
Thank you, Provost. Thank you. That wasn't the question I asked. I know we were cited on management accounts, and officers attended Harbour Board meetings regularly to provide advice and input to a review of the business case that was held on a regular basis at Harbour Board meetings. But at no point did officers ever say to the Harbour Board, actually, we need to think about the viability that this business plan can be delivered. So I'm just curious to know, when did you come to the view that stated in paragraph 4.16 that the current approved business plan cannot be delivered?
You'll recall that after, well, leading up to the Finance and Resources Committee, and just after there was a board where we did meet to discuss the recommendation to review the harbour on the basis that the business plan couldn't be met. That was the very basis of the rationale for recommending to Finance and Resources Committee to commence a review of the harbour. So the board would have been cited on that, and we had a conversation, to my recollection, I could be wrong, with the board that kind of talked through. I am aware the board's preference was to bring a business plan update to the council, and that was discussed at the board. That decision was going to, I suppose, overturned by the FNR request for a review, but that was the sequence that I recall. We did regularly discuss the business plan. We agreed that an update would be given to council. It was then subsequently turned into a review request by the Finance and Resources Committee.
Thank you, Provost. I don't attend the Finance and Resources Committee, but my understanding is that the paper that was brought forward to the Finance and Resources Committee was not the one that was requested by the Harbour Board. The Harbour Board, after discussion about the ongoing costs, requested that a case be made to the Finance and Resources Committee for to approve funding, and I argued quite strongly that we should do that at the Harbour Board meeting. And it was agreed that that's what would be taken forward to the Finance and Resources Committee, yet that's not what was taken forward there. So my assumption must be that at some point between the Harbour Board meeting and the Finance and Resources Committee meeting that the officers took a contrary view and chose to submit a different paper to the Finance and Resources Committee, which has led to this. But the Harbour Board was quite clear that they understood the financial implications, that they wanted to take measures with due consideration to take it forward. I'm not saying that the outcome would be any different, but I think that the process has bypassed the Harbour Board members collectively and individually. And so I'm trying to understand why that was done. Thank you.
The decision would have been taken and was taken by the council's executive leadership team in looking at the council's general revenue budget, the financial situation, and the increasing deficit of the harbour budget. So that was an executive decision to make that recommendation to the Finance and Resources Committee to review the harbour. The Chief Executive may want to make a comment here.
Thank you, Provost. I was going to wait to the end of questions before I came in with my comments. I try not to interject at council meetings because they tend to be political conversations, but on this occasion I think it's important to do so. The purpose of this report was clearly set out when Councillor Donaldson raised his first question and Mr Littlejohn gave his preamble to the report. This was a request of council through Finance and Resources Committee. That's who council officers are answerable to. We work for council. The paper does present a series of options, and part of the debate has felt that we have lost sight of the fact that there are a number of options that are set out within the paper. It's my role, and it's council officers' roles, to work within the policies and strategies that you give to us. And that's not just about considering the future of the harbour. That's about policies and strategies that extend right across this council. In 8 months since June, you have agreed a new transformation strategy. You have agreed a medium-term financial plan in September. You've agreed a new corporate plan in December. All of those documents stress the importance of looking at evidence-based decision-making. All of those documents stress the importance of a focus on need, not demand. They talk about how we will make difficult decisions as an organisation, and this is an exceptionally difficult decision, I appreciate, for many members. But the evidence presented in the report, in terms of the financial challenges facing the harbour, in terms of the level of demand there is for the harbour in its current form, in terms of the comments even made by Mr. Howie, and when he was asked the question about the impact of COVID and the level of demand, that was something he highlighted. We have also reflected the previous interest there has been on taking on the harbour for all of the responsibilities that would be required as a harbour authority. So all of that informs the recommendation that you have in front of you from officers. It's entirely within the gift of council to look at rejecting, amending, or going with another recommendation. But the recommendation you have just now seeks to reflect all of those and other considerations, and not least the fact that you have a £31 million hole in your general revenue funding being projected for the next financial year, and officers working at this point to look to put in front of you a balanced budget. So that's the context within which this report is set. I believe officers have done the job that has been asked of them. I think they have sought to reflect the policies that you have put in place as council. And I'm very clear, if there's an option which continues to incur the level of financial deficit that the harbour presents to us, then that would be something that we would need to reflect in the budget for next year, and would have a financial implication which could affect the council's services and the council's workforce. Thank you for the opportunity, Provost.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Final question, Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, Provost. Well, my question maybe sort of encompasses some of what our Chief Executive has just said. Extremely difficult decision for us all to be making. Many, many years of history here. But under the current financial constraints, budget constraints, this decision has to be faced. So, and we are in charge of public money, and it's quite right that we are having this robust debate. I'm wondering, with our option 5, which is ranked as our first option here, I'm seeing that we're still going to, there's potential larger capital costs sitting in with that. Regeneration, yes, we don't have to enter into it straight away, but you know, the next item on the agenda is discussing more financial impacts. Do the officers still see option 5 as the first, or do we have a, you know, almost a first equal between the option 3A? I'm just got a grave concern about capital investment in the option 5 coming after a closure for the public money that we manage.
You partially answered your own question in the sense of that there's no obligation to make any capital investment as part of option 5. The harbour is the harbour. It could be used informally until such times as a long-term master plan was produced and external funding and private sector capital sought to fund some of the proposals in any master plan. But there's no requirement to do that. So I think that's the difference between options 5 and option 3A. I would love there to be a financial alternative to closure, and if there is somebody out there that can turn the harbour around and somehow, you know, make a profit out of operating it and taking on all of the burdens, absolutely fantastic. So it's just in the evidence that we had and the long history we've had in running the harbour, which, you know, has been in decline long before the river silted. It's been in decline, you know, for 20 odd years. Our recommendation was really in terms of protecting the financials position, but without compromising the long-term, reuse of the harbour at some distant point in time if there's a market demand and increase. Our recommendation still would be to close it and make that financial saving, but it doesn't remove the ownership of the harbour or the use of the harbour by the people of Perth and Kinross and beyond on an informal basis. The harbour will remain under option 5 as is written currently in council ownership.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. Yeah, it's a very difficult decision for us all to look at, but thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to ask the Leader of the Council to move the report. Mr. Leader, I don't think your microphone is on there. Thank you.
I'm not used to being quiet over there. So thank you, Provost. Firstly, this report provides an update on the delivery of the Perth Harbour business plan from 2021 to 2026. There are positive achievements. Harbour operations are complex and bring a lot of risks, and I'm pleased that the harbour is compliant with the Port Marine Safety Code and that risks are managed effectively. I would like to thank our harbour operator CalMac and our officers for their support. However, there are also significant challenges which are not new, but are now impacting more than ever before on the use of Perth Harbour. The compulsory pilotage is relying on fewer individuals, and I would also like to thank them for the work they have done and their commitment. The Tay is a wonderful natural asset for the area as a whole, but a consequence is that recurring silting at the basin entrance is limiting tidal window for commercial vessels, with a need for regular dredging. Lack of accessible storage is limiting the type of cargoes that could be attracted. An ageing fair-made tug requires more attention and more money to be spent on it. And on top of that, the multiple global shocks such as UK, EU exit, COVID, the war in Ukraine, general market trends and increased competition have all accelerated the decline of Perth Harbour. Only 5 vessels will have visited the harbour in 22-23. All of these challenges are bringing increased costs, and the income generated is not sufficient to make a going concern of the harbour. This leads to a net deficit which is projected to be around 280k. This is not financially sustainable. That's why, and as requested, this report also provides an options appraisal for the future operations of the harbour. We have been presented with a wide spectrum of options, from doing nothing or a minimum to investing more, to selling to a third party, creating a joint venture, or closing to commercial traffic and encouraging regeneration. All of these options have risks. But the appraisal results rank option 5, closure as a commercial port and regeneration, as the preferred option. We all have committed to taking difficult decisions for the betterment of our residents in Perth and Kinross. And the evidence shows that despite the best efforts of the Harbour Board, CalMac and council officers, we cannot turn around an extremely difficult and challenging position. However, we can open up other opportunities. Option 5 recognises the position we are in and creates the platform to project ourselves into the future. It provides the opportunity to reimagine that part of the city and reconnect with the River Tay as a biodiversity and natural asset and as a tourism leisure asset. New initiatives in nature discovery or water-based activities linking Moncrief Island or Willowgate Centre become possible. There are also other opportunities that we don't know of yet that may arise through our collaboration at local, regional or national levels. I recognise that this is not an easy decision for any of us within council to take, given the hard work, commitment and dedication of all who have tried to make the harbour a success over many years. However, we are asked to agree option 5 as a preferred option, and I move the recommendations within that option for approval. However, Given that the legal process to officially close the harbour will take a period of time and is subject to formal consultation requirements, I would ask officers to test the market for interest in a potential long lease opportunity for taking on all the obligations of operating the harbour as a commercial port. If there is such a formal expression of interest, a further paper can be brought back to Council for consideration. If there are no formal expressions of interest in the intervening time, we move to close the harbour as a commercial port. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Councillor Rebeck, you are seconding, I believe.
Thanks, Provost. I formally second this motion. I think, given where we are in terms of our financial liability as a council, it's important we seek to diminish or mitigate completely that financial responsibility as soon as we can. I welcome the caveat, however, in the meantime, that if there is an interested party comes along that would wish to lease or buy the harbour, and therefore the council does not have that financial liability, but the harbour is also able to remain open, that would be even better. So I formally second the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Rebeck. Are there any amendments? Point of clarification, Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Provost. On a point of clarification, the extra addendum that the leader of the council added on there, can we just clarify whether that was a request to officers or an instruction, and whether it will be formally recorded as part of the resolution, should that be how the council resolves today?
My understanding it would be part of the resolution, Mr. Leader. The Leader has confirmed.
Thank you.
Okay, Bailey Ahern, you have an amendment.
Yes, thank you very much. And can I ask officers to put it up on the screen? And I apologise for the numerous changes within the last half hour, including changing the lettering on it. As you can see there, I have highlighted the changes in bold and underlined them. I've chosen option 1B in item 4. In item 5, I've requested that the Perth Harbour Board at the next board meeting on the 14th of February considers the report and the new Perth Harbour business plan update and develops a timescale and plan with officers to implement the preferred option, primarily phase 1 of the dredging, by using £60,000 from the unearmarked reserves. And listening to comments that have been in the chamber today, I've also put another item on there, which is to ask the Harbour Board and council officers to explore further commercial opportunities, including the lease, sale and any other options for the future of the harbour. It doesn't exclude anything. It includes wishes that have been put by other members within this chamber. I'm well aware of the current financial position of Perth and Kinross Council and asked to go with option 1B over option 5 as a risk. In their own words, officers have graded option 1B as medium risk and all the rest as high. And I think it would also be prudent that the Harbour Board have a look at some of the options, as I mentioned there in item 6. Ever since I took over as chair of the Harbour Board in 2017, we've had this constant threat of closure over our heads. We've also constantly requested that a dredge is done in order to maintain a suitable and viable waterway for shipping. This has been delayed, faced survey after survey, lengthy application processes, and we now have reached a point where we have the licenses to carry out the dredge, and we can no longer take ships in because the sandbank was built up to an unacceptable side, and we're stumped again. No wonder we've seen a downtrend in income. Projections when we signed the contract with CalMac to operate the harbour in July 2018 saw a turn towards profitability after the 5 years. But along with the lack of dredging, COVID and travel restrictions, we are currently at this point. Since publication of this paper in the press, I and others have been inundated by requests from individuals and companies to keep the harbour open, and we've heard that today as well. I've had companies contact me to say they would use the harbour and bring ships in, providing the dredging takes place, and they've been waiting a long time for this to happen. It's worth noting that comments about the windows of opportunity due to the tides are issues. By dredging, and as we already heard from Mr. Howie, these windows of opportunity are increased to acceptable windows. Stevedores in Perth are able to turn a ship round with incoming cargo within under 24 hours. This is a target not reached by nearly every other port. If my amendment is successful and the harbour is dredged, then it will be up to these companies to honour those pledges in bringing ships in. I've heard people say, why would you bring a ship come 26 miles up the river to Perth instead of using Dundee? And it's precisely because of that, with 26 miles up the river, that ships will come here. Apart from the climate change agenda, moving lorries off the road and the proximity to the road network to the rest of Scotland, it is precisely why Perth is attractive. The late Henry Anderson, a board member for a long time, who will probably be quaking in his boots at the thought of trying to close it yet again, was a great advocate of the harbour. And I attended a seminar in London where we met with a lot of harbour users that showed interest in bringing ships to Perth. Ships from Europe and England want to come here now just because of the green agenda and the location, as well as being cheaper than using road transport. I've heard that ships are no longer being built, and you heard Mr. Howie earlier say that there are ships that are available, similar to the Rhine River cruise ships, and the shallow draft are being built and used for reasons already mentioned. I've heard that Perth Harbour could be turned into a marina. Well, this is also a problem, and yet again you've heard that. For a start, the harbour would need to be dredged, where we heard that before. There is limited capacity on the quayside to store boats, let alone the problem of having them get out of the water due to the lack of cranes or the slipway, and the steep walls and limited anchorage points for a large number of boats that would be needed don't make it viable or profitable. You would then have the issue of operating leisure craft in a commercial operating environment. Again, we've heard that, with lorry movements that would cause a health and safety issue. Even if option 5 was chosen, we've heard that it would not be cost-free for the council. It still has to maintain harbour wall integrity as part of the flood defence system. It would still have an ongoing maintenance requirement for equipment. Berths in the bank along the back of the harbour require repair and shoring up, again at a cost, regardless of whether it is open to ships or not. And then there's the water safety that will fall to PKC, and it will need to be monitored. The option before you does not allow for any income offsetting any of those costs. I have had difficulty with the report as not all the information is in there. Far too many questions have been left unanswered, hence the amount of questions we've had in this meeting. The report says the board was consulted over the paper, which, by the way, is not what the board asked of PKC. We did not ask for a review. We asked for an application to financial resources for funding for the dredging, and what we got was a review. Not much thought has gone into the concerns of the board, in my opinion. Several board members have also disagreed with the comments made regarding the structure and responsibilities of the Harbour Board, and equally the responsibilities of officers. The board have had to go through mandatory training specifically because of their level of responsibility, where it was made very clear what our responsibilities were. All in all, the paper before you, in my opinion, is not complete, and it has been mainly an officer's opinion, which has had little or no consultation, as we've also heard. And in the meantime, we have a harbour which cannot be used because we cannot get the dredging done. I urge you to accept the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey Ahern. Councillor Frank Smith to second the amendment.
Thank you, Provost. It's been a long debate, so I'll keep it very short. I just hope it has a future, a good future, and I'm happy to second the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Bailey.
Thank you, Provost. This harbour was already given a second, or was it maybe a third chance to prove its worth with the awarding of the management contract to CalMac. I was at the meeting in 2018 when it was agreed, and we were assured that CalMac, working in partnership with officers, was the best way to promote the port and bring new revenue streams. It has not happened. It's time, therefore, to call a day on the harbour and invest our limited finances elsewhere on ventures that will help us build for the future, not the past. Nostalgia is not a safe basis for policy making, and I fear that the mover and seconder of the amendment are motivated by nostalgia today. Yes, there used to be a bustling harbour in Perth, but that was before the dawn of intermodal shipping and fast road links up and down the country. The numbers provide an evidence base that only supports closure. If we take this year's deficit of £304,000 and split it across the number of boats, we get a figure of £76,000. This harbour is running up a loss of £76,000 per ship that visits it. Neither the council nor the taxpayer can be expected to cover such losses for even a moment longer. Someone will have to foot that bill. That's even without the money for dredging or the tugboat. It is not the job of the taxpayer to fund a failing harbour, and I'm not surprised that such a proposal is coming from the not so fiscally conservative side of this chamber today. Conservatism in Perth must be all about nostalgia these days, because it certainly isn't about fiscal conservatism or free markets.
Therefore, I'll be supporting the motion. We have so many more important things to spend this money on and better ways to achieve economic development. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey. Councillor Freshwater.
Thank you very much, Provost. Notwithstanding the papers submitted and the debate we've had today, it's indeed, as has been highlighted, a very, very difficult decision for members, particularly for those of us who are relatively newly elected and those who have not been involved in the day-to-day running of the harbour. Indeed, we've learned a huge amount about the harbour just in these last few hours, but I do acknowledge the face-to-face briefing that was given before, and of course we have a very difficult decision that we cannot shirk. We've heard from businesses today within Perth and Kinross based in the harbour, and indeed I've been contacted by a resident in my own ward of Kinrossshire who is employed at the harbour and fears for his job and the lost economic activity. So clearly the harbour is not just a Perth City issue, but one for the whole of Perth and Kinross, and as we've heard, for the wider area. The paper submitted and the discussion that we had on it, whilst presenting options in theory, does suggest the preferred option is a fait accompli, and I know we have discussed that at length, but I'm not convinced that the other options have yet been given a fair hearing, at least by the full council, and I get that feeling that there's a consensus of that view from all political parties, including the comments that were made by the leader, in addition to his the main motion. And whilst I'm loath to burden the council with a loss-making enterprise that can lose cash, which can take money from the public purse, and indeed, in the long term, the preferred option presented today may be the right one, I do not feel that I can support it. Support an option that simply closes the harbour. Not that I'm old enough to remember, I do feel this is a decision that takes us back to the 1960s, and those who had to make a decision in light of the Beeching Review, which, as you recall, closed many of Britain's smaller rural railways, only to realise a few decades later that having a local railway was a rather good thing, especially in order to tackle climate change. Could we be saying the same thing about Perth Harbour in 30 years? I don't know. But in the absence of a crystal ball to see into the future of the sea freight industry and associated maritime technology, I do believe the harbour could be given a final chance, and I accept the comments made by Bailey, particularly given the choppy economic waters of the past few years. If possible, and I realise this may have been looked at in the past, and I believe it may have done, but I'm not sure it's been fully explored, I would personally favour the options of looking at the harbour as a fully commercialised, either on a sale basis or a lease basis, and taken on by a private operator, as it was suggested by our visitor earlier who provided the deputation. In conclusion, I believe the amendments submitted by Bailey Ahern and Councillor Smith would permit this exploration, and I would commend it to the Chamber. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Freshwater. Councillor Peter Barrett.
Thanks, Provost. It's something of a red letter day when I find myself in full agreement with the Leader of the Council and Bailey. But it is, however, time for cold consideration of the facts regarding the trading position of Perth Harbour, and not for wishful thinking about the illusory prospect of a return to the golden days in a vibrant Perth Harbour operation. What is clear, and has been clear for a long time, is that there are too few ships of a size which can navigate to Perth, operating in the sea area between Perth and ports of origin for cargoes and destination ports for outgoing ships. Those ships, as the report says, that do exist are ageing, and if they're replaced, they are likely to be deployed to busier waterways with deeper drafts and in and out cargoes. There is serious competition from competitor ports, and too small an area which Perth could claim to serve more closely and quickly than anyone else to make for a viable operation. And Mr. Howie pointed to Aberfeldy, and I think if you drew a line between Aberfeldy and Blair Athol, then they're probably the only points in which you could stick your pin in the map, which would Perth could serve better than anywhere else. And on top of that, there's the restricted access because of what we've heard regarding tides and depths. There have been numerous attempts to develop business cases for dredging to improve access, but they simply don't stack up. They would never pay back on the capital and investment, and the report highlights the very limited income generation potential that exists. There is a belief among some members that if we dredge it, they will come. But the truth is that as a council, we'd simply be throwing good money after bad, and we simply don't have the resources to continue doing that and to support a harbour operation which isn't ever going to break even, and in fact where losses are mounting and the deficit is mounting every year. On top of that, as I've said, there isn't a viable catchment area or lucrative niche market that can be served exclusively by Perth. There are problems with limited access, additional pilots and fragile rather than secure provision of pilots. Fife and Central areas are better served by Fife ports, including Kirkcaldy, Burtisland, Rosyth and Methil, and the central belt of Leith and Grangemouth. Dundee and Montrose are better located for Angus and the northeast before you get to Aberdeen. There is an unacceptable risk that the dredging operations will never achieve payback. Dredging needs to be considered based on realistic numbers of ships and assessed against the Council's standard capital investment criteria rather than wishful thinking. The report is comprehensive and clear. Its conclusions are frankly inescapable. As councillors, we're responsible for the safe and proper stewardship of council finances and for securing best value for the council and for the people we serve. After a decade of harbour losses, years of false dawns, we can't afford to make the same mistakes of the past or engage in Groundhog Day efforts to address the harbour deficits of almost £300,000 a year. That will not be turned around, and it's time to recognise that no business plan will achieve break-even. We can't let that continue, and we need to bite the bullet and progress with option 5.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Stewart.
Sorry,
Barrett, your microphone's still
on. Thank you, Provost. I have some sympathy with the point of view that Bailey was expressing regarding fiscal rectitude. However, and I was for a long time of the opinion that the sensible thing to do was to cut our losses on Perth Harbour and to close it and move on. However, having heard last week's briefing, having read the papers, having taken the opportunity to speak to Bailey Ahern as Chair of the Harbour Board, for which thank you for his time last week. Having heard the deputation today and the answers to the questions that members have put, and obviously thanks to officers and to Mr. Blacklock for their attendance and for their extensive answers to the questions, I think I've changed my mind in response to the further information that has arisen. I don't think that we've actually given the harbour a proper opportunity by doing any of the dredging that's needed, and we're now looking at minimal amounts as opposed to the eye-watering amounts that we were told were needed before. We've never really given the harbour the opportunity to progress beyond a sort of status quo and actually develop the markets and grow. And I think that for the amount of money that we're talking about in terms in Bailey Ahern's amendment, that is a drop in the ocean, pun intended, in comparison to the reserves that are available to the council. And I think it would be a good investment, at least to make sure that we've explored the options. That said, I am reassured by the commitment from the leader of the council in the addendum to the motion that at least if that is what is resolved by council today, then there will be the opportunity for a consortium, for example, to come forward with an offer and for that to be fully engaged with by members and officers of the council. On balance, however, I'll be supporting Bailey Ahern's amendment today.
Thank you, Councillor Conn-Stewart, Councillor Donaldson, and then Councillor James.
Thank you, Provost. I've heard many of the concerns that have been raised, and I appreciate them. I think I understand them. And I've listened, for instance, here to Councillor Stewart, and he does make a number of valid points. Nonetheless, I think, we're closing the harbour, perhaps even meantime, as a commercial operation. It may even be yet, and maybe it's being falsely optimistic, it could yet be a case of long live the harbour, but in a different guise, in a different format. I think what is clear to me, I asked a couple of questions and maybe it's a little bit hard hitting, but on my second question, I thought it was crucial. I thought it's the timeline that is set out for actual closure, for consultation, may take up until June, July before this is resolved by Scottish Government ministers, but that does not preclude us from entertaining perhaps a commercial sale or a long lease arrangement, and that is vital. We're not blocked by consultation progress, but I think it's crucial, and as our council leader has stated, we really do want effort by the team in economic business development to see, and I don't think that's happened yet, is to see if there are potential offers. And I did listen very much to what Simon Howie did have to say. So it's not perhaps as gloomy as one might think, but there we are. I think it has to be option 5.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Councillor James.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. And I'm a total polar opposite to Councillor Donaldson. No company is going to come in and buy something and it's already halfway down the road to closure. We need to give it a chance. As I said earlier, I've been here before, Weymouth and Portland in Dorset, where through lack of maintenance, a very profitable ferry company left the port due to lack of dredging. I think we're trying to compare apples and oranges here, because we're saying, business is failing. It's failing because we haven't done the maintenance. At least give it half a chance. We're trying to get business with our arms tied behind their back. So 60,000, I think it was quoted. I'm sorry, I haven't got the figure right in front of me. For the dredging, I think is a small price to pay, and to give it a chance, at least make it a viable business option and market it. It's to me a no-brainer. It's going to cost us to close it, so it's why not spend the money to keep it open while we market it properly? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. There being no other indications for. Oh, Councillor Duff, sorry, it's not showing up on mine. Councillor Duff.
Sorry, Provost, I did come in with a last-minute request to comment. I think, like many elected members, I have concerns about how best that we progress this decision. But I feel that keeping the harbour open as a going concern while we seek the opportunity to sell or lease the harbour is the correct option. Obviously, both the motion and the amendment have the option to arrive at a sale or lease, but the amendment at least keeps the harbour going as an open as a going concern, and it will give some reassurance, I suppose, to those businesses that are currently operating the harbour that they can continue to trade while we seek the sale or lease of the harbour. Going for closure today will be a death knell, I think, for them right away. So I hope that members can see sense in choosing the amendment as the best way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Bailey Ahern to sum up.
Yeah, I've listened to both sides of the argument, and I don't think I have much more to say than I have done. I think there's an awful lot being said today on both sides. And I'm just happy to go to the vote, and we'll see what the outcome is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bailey Ahern. Mr. Leader.
Thanks very much, Provost, for the opportunity to sum up. And yes, I've listened to everything everybody said. We are at a position within the council and the next paper will be another difficult decision where we've got to start moving this organisation through us on a sustainable footing. And if we cannot take hard decisions and keep putting them off as we have done in the past for too many years, we're never going to get anywhere. I voted to keep the harbour open the last time, 7 years ago or 6 years ago, to see what we could. Nothing has improved. I know circumstances haven't helped it, but nothing has improved. And we've got new councillors who have not lived through it, elected members, who haven't experienced the fact of watching something withering, and we are paying for it all the time. We've said we're going to make difficult decisions. We said we're going to try within our corporate plan. If you looked at the consultation that we put out to members of the public, over 1,000 people responded to. Top of that was the cost of living and poverty, where more than half the people put that as a highlight. Not one person there said, let's keep the harbour open or keep it afloat if we don't have to. I think I've taken on board what people have said. I'm happy for the motion, and I will state that if somebody comes forward while the process is ongoing, of course officers will engage with them. Of course, I'm not favour of sale. I can't believe there's any...
Excuse me, Mr Leader, I'm sorry to interrupt you summing up. Councillor Forbes, you have a point of order. I don't think that's a point of order. I think that is maybe a point of clarification if you had an answer to it, but I don't think it's a point of order unless you have a specific standing order you think it comes under, but I don't think it comes under any of them.
I have a feeling you'll know the standing orders far better than I do, Provost, so thank you very much.
That's good to know. Okay, Mr Leader, do you have anything else you wish to say in summing up?
I've actually forgotten where I was. It's so late in the...
I don't think we want to start all over again.
I won't start again. All I'll say is that we have... I want to give assurance that if I've remembered where I am, that if a viable and serious offer comes to lease the harbour as a commercial port, taking on obligations, I'm instructing officers as part of this motion that they will engage with them in good faith, and we will possibly... I would be quite happy if they take on. I'm not in favour of selling the harbour because we've sold things in the past, things have been bought, and we've had to pick up when they fall into disrepair. And I'm sure members have been here for more than 5 years. That's why we've got a wonderful building down there where the previous administration took a hard decision to step in, buy it and refurbish it. Don't want to be in that position again with the harbour, so that's why I'm looking for a lease.
Thank you. Okay. Well, so, Councillor Kigali, you have a point of clarification.
I'm very sorry to drag this out. So can I just confirm that within the motion then there will be no engagement over a sale from the council?
No, it is a long lease. The Leader of the Council made that clear in his opening and then his summing up. So long lease, but no sale. Okay. Mr Henry, would you like to confirm the terms of the motion and the amendment and take a roll call, please?
Thank you, Provost. Before I begin, just to advise that I believe Councillor Robertson, who was joining us virtually, has now left the meeting. So we're dealing with item 10 on the agenda, the report by the Executive Director of Communities. We have the motion from Councillor Lane, which I'll ask him to clarify that it is to accept the recommendations within the report. But given that the legal process to officially close the harbour will take a period of time and is subject to formal consultation requirements, the officers are being instructed to test the market for interest in a potential long lease opportunity, and if there is such an interest, a further paper can be brought back to Council for consideration. That's my understanding, Councillor Lang. So that motion is by Councillor Lang and seconded by Councillor Rebeck. We have an amendment from Bailey Ahern, seconded by Councillor Smith, the terms of which were both emailed to members and shared on the screen. Can I therefore ask members to indicate if they're voting for the motion or the amendment? Bailey Ahern.
Amendment.
Councillor Anderson.
Amendment.
Bailey.
Motion.
Councillor Liz Barrett.
Motion.
Councillor Peter Barrett.
Motion.
Councillor Braun,
Amendment.
Bailey Brock,
Motion.
Councillor Carr,
Motion.
Councillor Chan,
Amendment.
Councillor Cuthbert,
Motion.
Councillor Donaldson,
Motion.
Councillor Drysdale,
Motion.
Councillor Duff,
Amendment.
Councillor Forbes,
Amendment.
Councillor Frampton,
Motion.
Councillor Freshwater,
Amendment.
Councillor Harvey,
Motion.
Councillor Illingworth,
Amendment.
Councillor James,
Amendment.
Councillor Clegally,
Amendment.
Councillor Lang,
Motion.
Councillor Leishman,
Motion.
Councillor McPherson,
Motion.
Councillor Massey,
Abstain.
Councillor McCall,
Abstain.
Provost,
Motion.
Councillor McEwen,
Motion.
Bailey McLaren,
Motion.
Deputy Provost,
Motion.
Councillor Rebeck,
Motion.
Councillor Reid,
Amendment.
Councillor Shires,
Amendment.
Councillor Smith,
Amendment.
Councillor Colin Stewart,
Amendment.
Councillor Grant Stewart,
Motion.
Councillor Waters,
Motion.
Councillor Welsh,
Motion.
and Bailey Williamson.
Motion.
Provost, we have 22 votes for the motion, 14 votes for the amendment, and 2 abstentions, so the motion is therefore carried.
Thank you very much, Mr Henry. Members, move on to the final item, which is item 11, service concession arrangements. Stuart Mackenzie, the Head of Finance, will give a very brief introduction to the report.
Thank you, Provost, and good afternoon, councillors. It has been a long day. I think I'm going to disappoint Provost. I've got a few introductory comments on the report, which I hope will provide members with some of the answers to the questions that I know you may wish to ask. That's not a hint, it's just hopefully I can explain the detail of the report. This is an important paper, and this report summarises the flexibility being made available to the Council under Finance Circular 10/2022 to amend its accounting treatment for assets provided under a service concession arrangement. And for Perth and Kinross, that's for community campuses and Bertha Park Secondary School. The report recommends approving use of this flexibility on the basis set out in section 2. Specifically, the Council is requested to approve, apologies, I am struggling to get my Word document to move, to approve the use of the service concession flexibility from financial year 2022-23, so that the benefits can be factored into the Council's budget for 23-24. The assumption of a useful asset life of 50 years for the assets concerned. This is consistent with useful life assumptions for council property and other long-term infrastructure assets. The use of the annuity method for reprofiling payments, under which the level of principal repayment increases over time. This both matches how the council accounts for loan charges and reflects the requirement to reinvest in assets immediately prior to the end of a useful life. Members have previously been briefed on the significant impact on the council's medium-term budget position arising from the use of the service concession flexibility. This report is brought to council in advance of setting the budget so that officers are clear on the assumptions to be included in finalising budget papers. Subject to approval of the report, I will make a separate recommendation to council on the use of the funds realised through the service concession flexibility. It is, however, for elected members to determine how these funds are applied in setting the council's budget on the 1st of March. Now, this is an unavoidably complex area which is covered in some depth in the report. By way of background, the local authorities generally account for the cost of financing assets over the useful life of the assets concerned. And under the Council's current accounting policy, this ranges from 5 years for IT assets to 50 years for property and infrastructure assets. This approach links the cost of paying for long-term assets to the benefit derived both by current and future taxpayers in using them. The accounting treatment for assets under service concession arrangements is an exception to this approach. At present, local authorities are required to account for the cost of these assets over the contract period, rather than their useful life. For Perth and Kinross Council, the contract period for the community campus schools and Bedford Park Secondary is between 25 to 30 years, much less than their anticipated asset life. The service concessions flexibility provides the option to move to accounting for these assets over their asset life. Section 7 and Appendices A and B set out the financial implications of recommendations within the report. There is no change to the existing contracts or contract terms for the community campuses and Bedford Park arising from the use of the service concessions flexibility. The change is purely an accounting treatment. There is therefore no cost and additional interest charges in moving to account for these assets over a longer period, as all interest due will be met under the existing contract payments. The Finance Circular and the financial modelling within the report consequently focus on the repayment of principal. Should the Council approve the recommendations in the report, principal repayments will be profiled as detailed in Appendix A. And the last two columns of Appendix A show both annual and cumulative savings and costs arising from reprofiling. The reprofiling exercise will generate a non-recurring benefit of approximately £31.2 million over the period from 2010 until the end of the financial year. This is reflected in the figures shown above the bold line in Appendix A. Repayments of principal in years to 2041-42 will also be lower than under the current accounting treatment, and this varies between years, but represents an average saving of approximately £3 million each year. Due to the annuity calculation, where the level of principal repayment increases over time, this situation reverses from 2042-43 onwards, and the annual payments will continue until the end of the 50-year asset life. Again, this varies between years, but represents an average pressure of approximately £3 million each year, and the modelling concludes in 2069-70, or 50 years from the opening of Bedford Park in 2019, which is the assumed asset life of the school. As the contract for the community campuses ends in 2041, one approach to managing this additional pressure would be for the Council to apply part of the budget of the contract fee. In the current year, the contract fee for the community campuses and Bedford Park totals approximately £22 million. As reflected in both the graph and table on page 13 of the agenda pack, the total amount of principal repaid does not change through applying the service concession flexibility. It is the ability to retrospectively profile payments over a longer period in accordance with asset lives, which creates a significant financial benefit in the medium term. Now, to translate the service concession flexibility into usable funds, the Council can either undertake additional borrowing or draw down cash balances where these are available. As the Council is forecast to have temporary investment balances of approximately £160 million at the beginning of next financial year, should Council approve the use of the flexibility, my recommendation is to realise the benefit of a managed drawdown of cash balances over an extended period of time. Assuming these balances would otherwise be available to invest, there is, however, a cost in the form of investment income forgone. An Appendix B to the report models a potential cost in forgone investment income of approximately £1.6 million over the 19-year period to 2041-42. Although given the range of variables at play, this should be considered indicative. So to conclude, Finance Circular 1022 provides the Council with temporary flexibility to amend its accounting treatment for service concession contracts in either financial year 2022-23
or 2023-24. The use of the flexibility requires a decision of Council and represents a permanent change in the Council's accounting arrangements. The report recommends that Council approve the use of the service concession flexibility as set out in Section 2. The recommendation will promote consistency in how the Council accounts for its long-term assets and realise a significant financial benefit in the medium term, notably the £31.2 million non-recurring benefit modelled in Appendix A to the report. Turning the flexibility into usable funds through drawing down cash balances over time does, however, incur potential Treasury costs in the order of £1.6 million. And should Council not approve the use of the service concessions flexibility, other budget measures, including inevitably further savings, will require to be identified. Members are advised that the use of the service concessions flexibility in managing the Council's budget must be considered on a sustainable basis, as these funds, particularly the £31.2 million element, are non-recurring and the benefits unwind over time. In the medium term, these funds must be used on a managed basis to support the Council make the necessary adjustments to service delivery under the Change and Transformation Programme to achieve long-term financial sustainability. Happy to take questions, Provost.
Thank you, Mr. Mackenzie. Do members have any questions on this item? I've got Alistair Bailey with the tiniest of questions.
It really is tiny. Given that this is a prudent thing to do, why has it not been permitted since the start of this type of contract back in John Major's government?
Thank you, Alistair Bailey. I was really hoping for something I could just say yes or no to, as were you all. This has been a specific ask of the Scottish Government, who have taken that request to the Treasury in the context of financial pressures placed upon councils both during COVID and in the aftermath of COVID. That's about as concise an answer as I can give.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Barrett.
Entering into the spirit of asking Stuart a yes or no question, could I ask, was that really your abridged introduction?
Oh yes, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no other brief questions to the point questions, I'm going to ask the Leader of the Council to move a very brief summing up of the report.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I think because it has been a long day, I think this paper would have engendered more questions because it is a serious matter and it's a lot of money we're talking about here. And I think we're committed to taking the money because we have to. But it shouldn't be just to plug the gap. That we should be using this money for all the transformation that we want to take moving forward. We should be using this money that we've brought in to make the whole organisation operate in a more slim but focused way. We don't want, I don't want, and I'm sure none of you want, the people who are sitting here in 20 years' time, and there might only be a few of them that want to be here that length of time, but we don't want them facing the same challenges about plugging a gap, top slices and plugging a gap. So I'm glad that hopefully we can all just agree this paper, but make the best use of it moving forward. So that we don't leave a burden on people to come before and the residents that are coming through. So sorry for being a bit verbose there, but I will go into moving the paper now. Provost, before I begin, or just after I've begun, I think it's important I'd like the members understand where this proposal originated, and the answer was given by Mr. Mackenzie. In September 2020, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Economy wrote to the HM Treasury highlighting a package of financial flexibilities which they wished to get, and this was agreed to. Initially, this was to ensure that councils remained financially sustainable and that we were well placed to respond to the pressures arising from the impact of the COVID pandemic. However, time has moved on and the pressures on our budgets have never been greater. The cost of living crisis, inflation, climate change and increasing need and demand for our services is putting further pressure on our scarce resources. Provost, today we are being asked to change our accounting policy. In introducing this report, the Head of Finance has already provided us with a comprehensive run-through of what this change means. Importantly, we fully understand the consequences of implementing this change. A change that will create £30 million of non-recurring capacity and £3 million of recurring capacity to support the delivery of vital council services and transformation. I understand that some elected members may be reluctant to accept this change. However, if we don't accept the recommendations in this paper, the consequences could be catastrophic to our citizens and businesses in the short term. Importantly, at this stage, we are not being asked what to do with these additional resources. That will come later when we set the revenue budgets, all of us, and council tax on the 1st of March. It will be then for individual groups to decide if they accept the officer's recommendations or whether they have alternative proposals regarding how this extra capacity is allocated and when. However, we can be sure of one thing. If the recommendations in the report are not accepted, we won't have this option and we will inevitably be back to more severe cuts of services and or large tax increases. Provost, I commend this paper.
Thank you. Councillor Drysdale has advised me he's a very brief formal summing.
You will be delighted to know, Provost, that I'm delighted to second. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Donaldson, I hope it's a nice short comment that you've
got. Yeah, I will. And indeed, I think we're finishing later than even that Finance and Resources meeting at CTLR last September. I disagreed with our group leader who said earlier, our council leader who said earlier it was might be a difficult paper. To me, it's a no-brainer. It's just something that we have to do. 3 reasons. One, there is justification here because there's broad support, not just the Scottish Government, but local government finance directors and also the professional body SIPFA. So that matters. 2, it is consistent because it aligns our accounting policies with other areas and taking it over 50 years. It's also what's, for instance, Stagecoach applies depreciation, it's long-term land and buildings. But the final point is if we don't proceed, and it gives us much more leeway, in particular for the transformation programme, but you know, the alternative is over 31 million of cuts over the next 3 years. But it's not just about avoiding cuts. So it gives us flexibility, gives us leeway, and I strongly support this paper. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donaldson. Councillor Duff.
Yes, Provost, just a brief comment. I wanted to thank the authors of the report, Scott Walker, Donald Coyne and Mr Mackenzie. I think it has finally cleared away the mist surrounding service concessions in my head, and I think I understand just exactly what the implications of our decision are now. I'm happy to support the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Mr Leader, do you wish to sum up?
Mercifully, no.
Thank you very much. Members, can we agree the report? Thank you. Item 12, elected member briefing notes. Can we note the briefing notes that have been issued to elected members since the last council meeting on the 21st of December 2022? Thank you very much, councillors. That concludes today's business. Thank you for your forbearance and have a safe journey home.